Hey there, and welcome back. In this lesson, we will be creating a funky logo animation for a made-up YouTube channel that can be used as a cool logo bumper. A logo bumper is a short animated sequence that serves as an introduction to a video or can be used as a transition from one scene to another. We'll be focusing on a really cool technique called stretch text animation. By the end of this lesson, you'll know how to create an awesome logo animation that will blow everyone's mind. So, let's get started and have some fun. Hi there, and welcome back. Let's start by checking out how this logo was made in Illustrator. For this, head to the AI folder in the main course folder and open the second logo. Let's imagine this logo is for a YouTube channel that talks about motion design and animation. As you can see, this design is also divided into several layers. There's a layer for the main text, a layer for the slogan, and these icons represent different keyframe types found in After Effects. Later on, we will learn an interesting way to blend them into the logo animation, instead of just leaving them as they are in the original design we see now. And now, let's look at the storyboard I created for this logo design. Since we're talking about a YouTube channel that's all about motion graphics, I was thinking we could start off with a stretched out text animation of the logo letters. Because stretched text animation creates a great sense of motion. Then I thought about an interesting way to combine all the icons with the text. I want the icons to enter the scene and move the rest of the text to increase the sense of motion in the scene. Alright, enough with the talking. Let's get started and launch After Effects together. We can close this window. Now, so that we all see the same panel layouts, let's click on Default here. And now, let's create our first composition by clicking on New Composition. We'll name it Logo Animation 2. Moving on to the resolution. We'll work in Full HD format, which is 1920 pixels in width and 1080 pixels in height. Next, let's set the frame rate to 24 this time. The duration can be 20 seconds this time. And finally, let's choose the background color for the composition. Let's go with black. Now, click OK here and here. And before we start working, I want to teach you about a very important action in After Effects called Purge. When you work on a project in After Effects, it stores a bunch of data and info in its memory cache. And sometimes that cache can get all clogged up with old or unnecessary stuff, which can slow down the program and even cause errors or crashes. So, when that happens, you can use the purge function to clear out the cache and free up some memory. It's super helpful when you're having performance issues or running into errors. Just clear out that cache, and you'll see a big improvement in how the program runs. So, as we did some pretty complicated stuff in the last lesson, it's smart to help After Effects perform better by getting rid of any unnecessary data. This way, we can work on this project without any annoying problems. So let's go to Edit, Purge, and select All Memory and Disk Cache. You'll see how much junk you've collected. The number may differ for you. Anyway, hit OK, and wait a few seconds for everything to be cleared out. OK, and now, it's an excellent time to save the project and give it a name. So, let's go to File, and click on Save. Now, let's find the folder we created for the lesson. Enter the AE folder, and name the After Effects file we are working on. You can select this project to sample the name. Then, change the number to 2, and the name of the logo to Design in Motion. Once done, click on Save. Now let's import our logo into the project. So double-click in the empty area in the project panel. Then, enter the AI folder, and select the second logo. Make sure we don't select this function. Then click Import. As we learned, we need to import it as a composition, because we want this file in separate layers. Here, we choose layer size, because we want the layer boundaries to match the object size, and not the document's size. Finally, hit OK. And there it is! We've created a new folder containing all the layers of the Illustrator file. Plus, a new composition with the logo layers inside it. When we open it up, we'll see the logo split into layers, just like it's structured in the original Illustrator file. Alright, Let's close this pre-comp, and we're good to start the lesson. So first, let's open up the Logos Layers folder in the project panel, and drag the main text of the logo into the composition. And now, to create the stretched animation we see in the example, we need to convert this Illustrator layer into a shaped layer with a path, similar to how we convert a text layer into create outlines in Illustrator. This way, we create a shape with a path that we can move and modify to any other shape we need. And in After Effects, to convert this layer into a shape with a path, right-click on the layer, go to Create, and select Create Shapes from Vector Layers. The original Illustrator layer will automatically be turned off, and since we don't need it now, you can delete it by selecting it and pressing Backspace or Delete keys. And before we move on, here's a helpful tip for you guys. When creating a stretched text animation, it's best to use sans serif fonts, which are those without the small decorative strokes at the end of each letter, known as serifs. This way, it will be much easier to animate the text. Alright, so now we have a shape layer, and we can use the pen tool to play around with the path of the letters. But before we dive into it, let me give you a little tip. If you want to add a stroke to your design, you might think that you can just choose a color and make it thicker. Well, it won't appear. That's because there's no stroke in the original Illustrator design. However, luckily there's a cool way to add stroke directly in After Effects. Here's how to do it. Open your layer and check out its contents. You can see all the shapes that make up the layer, which means all your letters. To add a stroke to each letter, select Contents, then open the Add menu, and select Stroke. Now you can adjust the thickness and color of the stroke to match your preferences. But if you're not planning to use stroke, just select this parameter and hit Backspace or Delete to remove it. Okay, so as I mentioned earlier, those groups you're seeing on the screen, they're all letters. To make things easier, let's rename these groups to match the letters they represent. For example, if this group represents the letter D, let's select it, press Enter, hold down the Shift key and type D. Now, let's select this group and change the name to uppercase E. Do the same thing for other groups, and name them according to the letters they represent. Now, let's learn how to stretch the individual letters in a design. If I click on one point and try to move it, nothing happens. To move the points of the letter path, we first need to open the shape and select the path that makes up the letter. This letter, for example, is made up of two paths, one for the inner part of the letter and another for the larger part. Once we select the path through the layer, we can then choose the points and move them around to stretch or adjust the letter as needed. In order to create an animation for the path, we need to open it up. This will allow us to see its stopwatch and create keyframes for this path. But rather than manually opening all of the necessary paths, we can simplify the process by selecting the layer and typing path in the search bar. After Effects will then display all of the paths associated with this layer. You may notice that for each shape in this layer, there is an additional property called Merge Path. However, we don't really need this one, so we can select it and delete it from all the shapes in this layer. Let's find all the merge paths and delete them before animating the layer. Alright, once we have done this, we are ready to move on to the animation phase. So first, because we already know that all the shapes here need to look like they do now at some point in the future, we need to create the first keyframes without changing anything. We don't know when this will happen, but we know it needs to happen. So, we need to create keyframes for all the paths in this layer. So let's do it. And now, to make things easier, we can select the layer and press the U key to hide all the unnecessary properties and see only the paths with keyframes. Now let's make our workflow smoother by learning how to move the panels around in the software. This is particularly handy for those of you working on laptops with smaller screens. So, let's close the folder and adjust the panels to suit our animation needs. First, let's shrink the project panel and the workflow panels. Then, we'll grab the composition panel and drag it here. we can enlarge the screen a bit more. Let's zoom out a bit. And now, to see more of our timeline, we can right-click here, go to Columns, and click on Stretch to hide this function for now. Let's hide this feature too. Right-click here, go to Columns, and click on Parent and Link. Don't worry, we can always bring these functions back later. Additionally, we can minimize this area even more by dragging the small lines here to the side. By doing this, we have more space and can continue with the project. Now, let's get closer to our timeline to see the keyframes up close. By the way, if you see the seconds here represented differently, just head over here, hold the Control key, and click on the numbers until you see it in seconds. Alright, so after we've learned how to organize the panels, let's bring everything back to its original position. For those who prefer to work in this panel arrangement, you can stick with it. Okay, let's grab the composition panel here and drag it to the bottom of the software. And now, let's bring back the hidden functions. Right-click here, go to Columns, and select Parent and Link. Let's also bring back the Stretch function. Great, and now, we are ready to animate the text. We're going to create 3 different shapes at 3 different time points for the letter design. We'll do this by creating keyframes and adjusting the path of the letters. This way, we show After Effects how the shapes of the letters need to look at specific points in time. Then, After Effects will connect the different forms that were defined, creating the stretched animation for us. So, as we said before, we know that the letters need to appear as they are right now at some point in the animation. In the meantime, let's say they should look like this at second number 2. So let's go to second number 2 with the time indicator, select the keyframes, and move them while holding the Shift key. Now let's move 1 second back in time, to second number 1, and change the appearance of the letters. In other words, let's show After Effects how these letters should look at the second number 1. For convenience, let's hold the space key and drag the screen towards the first letter, the letter D. Then, let's change the shape of this letter to the way we want it to appear at the second number 1. Let's select these 2 points, and drag them outside the scene, while holding the Shift key to move them on the straight axis. Now, let's click on this point, hold the Shift key, and select this point as well. Next, let's drag these 2 points here, while holding the Shift key. And now, let's select all the points on this side, being careful not selecting the points of the letter E. Alright, let's bring them here. Next, let's move to the beginning of the timeline, select these points, move them a bit to the left, and then select all these points, and move them outside of the frame. And now, After Effects will know how this letter should appear at 3 different time points. In the second number 0, the letter looks like this. In the second number 1, the letter looks like this. In the second number 3, it returns to its original shape. Now, let's do the same thing for the letter E. So as you can see, we got the first keyframe at the second 2, which indicates to After Effects how this letter's path should look at this point in time. And now, let's do the same for the letter E. But before that, let's turn off the letter D so that it doesn't interfere with us working on the letter E. To hide the letter D, we need to close the layer and reopen it to see all the groups inside it. To close all the open groups and find the letter D faster, we can close the contents while holding the Control key. Now, if we open it again, we will see the letters more conveniently when all the parameters are closed. Here is the letter D. Let's click on the eye icon to hide it. Now, to go back and change the path of the letter E, we need to see our keyframes again. So, let's select the layer and press U. It's important for me to show you all of these steps because this is the working process for creating complex stretch text animations. Alright, now, to be able to select the points, we need to click on the path of this letter. Then, let's select these points and move them outside the frame. Now, let's zoom in a bit, either with the mouse wheel or using these keys. Be careful not to select the points of the letter S. Let's move it here. Maybe here. We can select these points and move them here to create a more interesting motion. Finally, let's go to the beginning of the timeline and adjust the point in that way so we can get them out of the frame. So now, After Effects knows that in second 0, the path should look like that. At second 1, the path will look like that. And at second 3, the path comes back to its original position. Let's see how it looks. I think we can create a more interesting animation. For this, let's move to second 1 and change the way the letter looks at this point in time. In other words, let's change the keyframes we have now. It is crucial to position the time indicator on the keyframe accurately. To achieve this, you can move the time indicator and hold down the Shift key. This will enable it to snap to the keyframes close to it. Okay, now let's get closer to this part of the letter. Select this point, hold down the Shift key, and select these points as well. Now let's drag them here. So basically, we've changed the design of the letter to how it should look at this point in time. Let's go back to this keyframe one more time and adjust these points once again. Move these points a bit to the right. I think it looks better. Alright, moving on. Let's return to the second 1 and start working on the next letter. We won't use the stretch text style for the letter S, so let's delete the keyframes we created for its path. We'll shape this letter differently later. So select his keyframe and delete it. And now, let's select the path that above it, which is the path of the letter I. This time, we'll stretch this letter from above. To work comfortably, let's set the preview screen to fit. We can enlarge the preview panel a bit. Now, let's select the upper points. We can get a bit closer. Make sure we are at second 1. Now, let's move them up. Next, let's select the lower points of this letter and move them here. Then, let's go to second 0 and take these 2 points out of the frame. We've created 3 keyframes, each with a different design for the letter. But before moving on, let's go back to the second number 1 and adjust the design of this letter at this point in time. Select the lower points and move them down a bit. Let's see what we've got. I think it looks better. Now let's move on to the letter G. This letter, unlike the others, has a rounded portion, which requires us to handle it differently. Let me explain what I mean. Let's go to the second number 2 and zoom in a bit. Don't do it with me for now. I want to show you what would happen if I tried to select these points and move them downwards. As you can see, the letter's shape will change and look weird. This happens because this area is rounded. When working with letters that have rounded areas, we might need to add more points to the path. Now you can do it with me. So to do this, let's select the pen tool, get closer to the path, and create a new point here and here. Now let's switch back to the selection tool and select all the points that make up the bottom part of the letter, without selecting the 2 new points we created. Now let's go to the second number 1, and when we move the selected points downwards, the shape of the letter will be preserved as needed. This is because we created those 2 additional points. Okay, let's move back a bit and continue shaping the letter at this point. You can also move the selected points by pressing the arrow keys on the keyboard while holding down the Shift key. This way, the movement will be in larger increments. Now, let's select these points and find a different place for them. Somewhere around here, that's fine. Next, let's go to the second number 0 and adjust the design of the letter one more time. Once done, let's check how it looks. Alright, let's place the time indicator at the second number 2 and move on to animate the path of the letter N. And since I want to animate the path to enter the scene from the left, I will turn off the letter before it. To do that, we need to see all the groups inside this layer. Because right now, we can't see the eye icon from which we can turn off the groups. So let's close the layer and reopen it to see all the groups inside it. And now, to see all the groups in a more convenient way, we need to close the contents section while holding Ctrl and then reopen it one more time, but without holding the Ctrl key. Now we can easily turn off the groups we already animated to focus on animating the path of the letter N. To select its path and move it, we must press the U key and see its keyframe. Here, we can select any path we want. Alright, let's go to the second number one and start to design the path in the way we want the letter to look at this point in time. So first, let's select this area and move the selected points somewhere here. Then, select these points and move them out of the frame. Next, let's move this area here. And this one, here. I think we should move this point a bit to the right. Once done, let's go to the beginning of the timeline and design the path at this point in time. Don't forget to hold down the Shift key while moving the points. I think it looks good. Let's hit Ctrl S to save the project. And then, move on to animating the next path. First, make sure you stand at the second number one. And this time, let's make the letter I enter the scene from down here. So let's grab the bottom points and move them down here, out of the frame. Now, we need to select all the upper points and move them here. We can zoom out a bit. Alright, next, let's head over to the beginning of the animation and get these points out of the frame. And now, the path looks different at 3 points in time, creating the cool stretch text animation from the bottom. Alright, we are moving on to the next letter. Let's make it enter the scene from above. So go to the second number one and design the path as it should look at this point in time. First, let's select the upper points and move them up here, out of the frame. Now, select the bottom points and move them somewhere around here. I accidentally selected one of the points on the path of the letter M. It happens sometimes, but no need to worry. Just hit Ctrl Z to undo the action. Alright, and now I will reselect these 2 points and move them here. Once done, let's go to the beginning of the timeline and get all the points out of the frame. Now set the preview to fit, and let's see what we got. I think it looks good, and we are ready to move on to the next one. So let's go to the second number one. We can zoom in a bit to see the letter M up close. And now, let's click on one of the points, zoom in a bit more, and select the bottom points to make this letter enter the scene from the bottom. But be careful not to select these 2 points, because when we move all of them together, the path will look weird. So make sure you select the right points. Alright, after selecting the right points, let's move them down out of the frame. And to make the animation interesting, let's move these 2 points here. Next, select the upper area of the path, and move it somewhere around here. Great, now go to the beginning of the timeline, and let's get this path out of the frame. It looks great. Let's move on to the letter O. But instead of animating it in a stretchy way, we will create a scale animation for it later. Therefore, let's hide this letter for now and focus on the path of the letter T. And to do that, we need to see all the groups inside this layer. So let's close the layer and reopen it to see all the groups inside it. And now, to close all the open groups, we need to close the contents section while holding Ctrl and then reopen it one more time, but without holding the Ctrl key. Now, we can easily turn off the group of the letter O. Great, and now let's select the layer and hit the U key to get back to see the keyframes so we can animate the path of the letter T. Let's make it to enter the scene from above. So, let's go to the second number one and design the path as it should look at this point in time. First, let's select the upper points and move them up here, out of the frame. For a more interesting look, let's select only these 2 upper points and move them out of the frame. Now, select the bottom points, and move them somewhere around here. And now, let's go to the beginning of the timeline, and get all the points out of the frame. Alright, and now, let's animate the letter I. So first, let's stand on the second number 1. And decide that this letter will enter the scene from the right. To make it easier to work, let's hide the rest of the letters. So once again, close the layer, and reopen it to see all the groups inside it. And now, turn off the letter N and the letter O. Once done, select the layer, and hit the U key. Great, so now let's select the points in the right side of the path, and drag them to the right, outside of the frame. Let's also move these points here, to create a more interesting look for this path at this point in time. Then, go to the beginning of the timeline, and drag these points out of the frame. I think it looks nice. Now let's bring back only the letter N, because we will animate the letter O differently later. And so we can animate the path of the letter N, we need to turn off the path of the letter I. So let's do it. There it is. Great, now select the layer and press U. Go to the second number 1. Click here to highlight the path, and let's design this path to how it should look at this point in time. Now go to the beginning of the timeline, and get this path out of the frame. Let's see how that looks. We can adjust the path at second number 1. That's better. Once done, it's a great time to save the project before we move on. Alright, and now, let's start to animate the letters that we didn't stretch. But first, let's delete the keyframes on these paths because we will create a new one in a minute. So select them and hit backspace or delete. Great, and now to turn back on the hidden letters, we need to see the groups of this layer. For this, let's close the layer, and reopen it to see all the groups inside it. And now, to see the groups clearly, we need to close the contents section, while holding Ctrl, and then reopen it one more time, but without holding the Ctrl key. Now, we can easily turn back on all the letters, including those we need to animate. Once done, set the preview screen to fit, and bring the layers panel down a bit. And now, let's animate the letters S and the 2 O's. I want to create a scale and a rotation animation for these letters. Let me show you how to do it in the best way ever. So, first thing first, let's select the letter S, hold the Ctrl key, and select the 2 O's. Now, let's open their properties. We can enlarge this panel a bit. And now, open the transform properties for the letter O, go to the second number 2, and create the first keyframe for the scale property. And because we've got all 3 groups selected, After Effects has taken care of the rest and automatically created keyframes for the other selected letters. Which is exactly what we need. That's why I picked these 3 letters all at once. So now, we let After Effects know that at the second number 2, the 3 letters should stay the same size they are right now. And now, let's go to the second number 1, and decide that at this point in time, the scale value should be 250. Or maybe 200. Then, let's go to the beginning of the timeline and set the scale to 0. Alright, and now, let's do the same with the rotation property. That is, let's add a cool rotation animation to these letters, while they scale up. But let's do it for the letter S only. So first, we can go to second number 2. Now, click here on the empty area, to deselect the 2 O's. Great, and now, select the rotation property for the letter S. And as we did earlier, since we know that the rotation of the letters should look as it is right now, let's create the first keyframe with the current value of 0 degrees. And now, let's stand here with the time indicator, so we can see the letter, and set the rotation value to -180. Finally, let's move this keyframe to the beginning of the animation. And with this, we have finished to animate all the letters. The hardest task is behind us. And now, we can close the contents, then select the layer and press U to see the keyframes only, and focus on improving the motion. We will learn how to do it in the next part. It's going to be super fun, so see you there. Welcome back. Let's learn how to make this animation move in a much more exciting way. So first, we will begin by changing all the keyframes to easy ease. Select all the keyframes and press F9. Let's see how it looks now. Next up, we'll take the motion to the next level by tweaking the keyframe velocity for all the keyframes, just like we learned in the previous lesson. And remember, we can change the velocity for one property type at a time. As you can see, we've got multiple keyframes for different properties, like path, scale, and rotation. Let's start by adjusting all the path keyframes. So, let's select these keyframes. Now, hold the Shift key and select the other keyframes of the same property. Here, we can see that it's a different property, so I didn't select it. Now, let's select these. Also, this is a different one, so we won't select it. Okay, and finally, let's select these. Once that's done, we can hold the Alt key and double-click one of the selected keyframes. Let's see how the animation appears with a velocity of 85 on both axes. I think we can change it to 95 on both axes, which adds more interest to the animation. So let's do it right now, and see it one more time. Awesome! Now let's move on to the scale property keyframes. First, we'll select these keyframes. Hold the Shift key and continue to select the other keyframes of the same property. Now, hold the Alt key and double-click one of the selected keyframes. Change the velocity of 95 on both axes here as well, and hit OK. We don't have to mess with the S letter keyframes for the rotation property cause they look good already. OK, and with that, we've fine-tuned the letters, and now we're ready for the next step, which is creating offsets for each animation. I'll explain what I mean. Right now, all the letters enter the frame at the same time. To make the animation more interesting, we can stagger the entrance of each letter one after the other. For this, we need to move the keyframes we created and create offsets in the animation. That is delaying the animation for the path keyframes. This will make the letters enter the scene one after the other, rather than entering the scene all at once. But before we do that, we need to make sure that each letter is on its own separate layer. This will make it easier to adjust the offsets later on. Don't worry, I'll show you exactly how to do it. First, we need to see all the letters in this layer. To do that, let's close the layer and reopen it to see its contents. Now, hold the Control key and close the contents. And now, open it again, without holding the Control key. And here, we can see all the letters in this layer. Because we have 14 letters, we must create 14 separate layers, each containing only one letter. To do this, let's close the layer, and now let's duplicate it using the shortcut Ctrl-D 13 times, so that we end up with a total of 14 layers. Before we press the shortcut, I want to remind you that all the shortcuts in After Effects will work, only when your keyboard language is set to English. Okay, now let's select the layer and duplicate it 13 times. Once done, let's open the contents of this layer, and we'll keep only the letter D on it, while deleting the rest of the letters. So, let's select the letter N, hold the Shift key, and select the letter E, to select all the letters in between. Now, press Backspace or Delete to delete them. Then, press Enter on this layer and rename it to the letter D. Finally, let's close it and move on to the next layer. Open its contents, and keep only the letter E. And rename the layer accordingly. In this layer, we'll keep only the letter S. And of course, rename the layer accordingly. Let's continue doing this for the remaining layers. Here, we'll keep the letter I. Here, we'll keep the letter G, and so on. The process of creating this stretch text animation style can be quite manual and time-consuming. But remember that our logo consists of many letters. You won't need to create this type of animation for a quantity of letters this large every time. I chose to work with many letters in this lesson so that you can practice these actions as much as possible. This way, you'll get used to them and understand the steps in creating complex stretch text animation. So be patient and enjoy the learning process, because after finishing this course, you will get the confidence to create a variety of premium logo animations for your future clients. Okay, once we have finished dividing the letters, we should save our project by pressing Ctrl+S. And to make our work easier, we can tag the layers that belong to the same word with a different color than the others. For instance, we can tag the two layers that form the word in with one color, and all the layers that make up the word motion with another color. Great, it looks good. Now, if we isolate this layer, we'll see that its anchor point ain't centered. This can mess up the animation, especially if we want to rotate the letter. To avoid this, we can select all the layers and center their anchor points at once, using the Ctrl-Alt-Home shortcut. So let's do it for all the layers at once. Select all of them, and press Ctrl-Alt-Home. This will make sure that all the anchor points are now perfectly aligned on each layer. And now, let's start to improve the animation. First thing first, I think the animation is too slow right now. Let's learn how to speed it up very quickly. Let's enlarge this panel, and see the animation one more time before making any changes. First of all, in order to speed up the animation, we need to see the keyframes of the layers. To do that, let's make sure we don't have any layer selected and press the U key. And now, to see all the keyframes, let's enlarge this panel. Now, we can see that the animation for all the letters takes 2 seconds. And now, I want the animation for the letters to last only 1 second. To do that, I can move this keyframe closer to the one before it. Then I can also move the last keyframe a bit closer as well. But instead of moving the keyframes one by one, we can do this in a much smarter way. To do this much quicker, let's select all the keyframes. Then, let's place the time indicator at the second number 1. And now, while holding the Alt key, let's drag one of the last keyframes to the position of the time indicator, while also holding the Shift key. This way, we've shifted all the keyframes to the new time point we chose, and maintained an equal distance between them. If we had done it manually, it would have taken forever. Alright, let's see how it looks. Looks awesome. Now let's press U to hide the keyframes for all the layers, and finally start creating the offset we planned. Let's begin by creating the offset for the layers that make up the word design. So let's turn off the other layers for now. Now let's decide that the first letter to enter the frame is the letter N. So we won't touch this layer, and we'll leave it where it is now. The letter that needs to come after it is the letter G. So, let's grab this layer and move it forward in time. Now, let's make sure that the letter G doesn't overlap with the letter N. That looks good. Now, let's move on to the next letter. The next letter that should enter the frame is the letter I. So, let's move it forward in time, so it enters after the letter G. Now, let's create this offset for all the layers of this word. Try to maintain the same distance between the layers for now. Soon we will adjust the distance to get a more interesting result. Once done, make sure no letter is colliding with another. I see that the letter S is colliding with the letter I. So let's move this layer further ahead in time. Next, let's adjust the timing for the letter E and the letter D. Let's see what we've got. I think it looks good. But I think we can adjust the timing for the letters E and D one more time. I want them to enter the scene a bit earlier. This is the process of creating the offset for this animation style. We always move the layers and check how they look in relation to the rest of the animation. So, keep moving around with the time indicator, and check for the animation, after moving and adjusting the timing of the layers. Alright, I think it looks good. Let's continue with the next word. Turn on these two layers and time their entrance. And now, let's find a good time for these two layers to enter the scene. Let's decide that these letters will enter from this time point. We can delay the letter N a bit. Looks nice. We can move on. Now, let's create the offset for the word motion. Let's decide that the letter M will enter from the beginning of the animation, so we won't move this layer. Let's move the other layers forward in time, so they enter one after the other. Keep moving the layers in the timeline panel, while checking the timing between the layers in the preview panel. Now, let's see how it all looks together. I think the letter N should enter the scene a bit earlier. So let's move this layer here. Once we're done timing the layers, let's put them all together into a pre-comp for a neater project. This way, we can easily control the animation later on. So, let's select all the layers and hit the shortcut, Ctrl-Shift-C. Call this pre-comp text animation. Make sure both of these are checked, and hit OK. Now, we have the entire animation in one layer. And before we move on, I want to show you what happens if we want to scale this layer later on. As you can see, the larger we make the layer, the lower the quality becomes. To prevent this, we can apply the collapse function found here. If you can't see it, you can click here. OK, so let's apply the collapse to this pre-comp. And as you can see, the quality has significantly improved. Now, let's bring the size to 100%, set the screen preview to fit, and continue to create the second part of the animation, which is the icon animations. And we will do it in the next part. So see you there. But before you dive into the next lesson, I highly recommend that you take a 10-minute break. Get up from your chair, do some light stretching, and drink a glass of water. This will help you to recharge your brain for the next lesson. Welcome back. Let's get started with creating the icon animation. First things first, we gotta find those icons in the project panel, which you can find in the folder with all the logo layers. Once you've spotted them, just select all of them and drag them into our composition. Remember, we need to make sure that the icons move as a single layer later on. So we need to nest them in one group. In After Effects terms, we call it to pre-compose these layers. To do this, press Ctrl-Shift-C. Let's name it Icons Comp, make sure both are selected and hit OK. Now let's enter the composition we just created. As you can see, we have a lot of empty space here, meaning the composition size is too large. To resize this composition, we need to access the composition settings. To do that, press Ctrl-K. As you can see, we're inside the settings of the Icons Comp composition. Now make sure Preview is selected so we can see the changes we made in real time, and let's reduce the size. Let's try 200 by 200, or 100 by 100. That's better. Now let's return to the main composition. The composition size is smaller now, which makes things easier to work with this layer later. Next, we can apply the collapse to this composition and, of course, to all its layers. If you can't see this icon, you can click here. Great, and now let's turn off all layers except for this one. On second thought, let's leave only the last layer turned on. And start making the entry animation for this composition, based on what's happening in the text animation. As you can see, this icon is supposed to replace the top part of the letter I. This means we don't need this part right now. Let's learn how to turn it off. First, let's enter this composition, select the letter I, open its contents, and see from which paths it is composed. There's the second path, which is the circle, and the first path, which is the line. We want to turn off the second path. Great, now you can close this layer and return to the main composition. Now let's turn on this layer. And now, when we're not sure how the animation should begin, we can animate our objects from the end to the beginning, just like we did with the letters. Since we didn't know how the letters should look at the start, we made keyframes for how they should appear at the end of their animation. We'll do the same thing here, by placing the icon at the time when we know how it should look at the end. We want it to be in the same position as the circle of the letter I. Let's start by pressing S to scale down the layer a bit and moving it lower. You can use the down arrow key to lower this layer. Now, let's give this layer a different color for easier differentiation. And now, let's animate the icon's pre-comp position. We'll stand at the second number 3. That is when the text animation is completed, and set the first keyframe for the icon's pre-comp. That is, the icon should be at this size, so let's create keyframes with the current value. Now, let's set a keyframe for the position property at this point in time. So let's press Shift-P to add the position property. Now, create the first keyframes with the current value. So basically, we've indicated how the icon's pre-comp should look at this point in time, at the end of the animation. And now, let's decide how and where the icon's pre-comp should be before it enters the scene. Right now, we don't know the exact second when it should enter the scene, so for now, let's say it should start entering from the beginning of the timeline. Later, we'll adjust the timing of the animation and its duration. Okay, so let's say that at this point in time, the icon should be here, outside the scene. A new keyframe with the new value of the position property is automatically created. This means that from second 0 to second 3, the layer will move in a certain way. Now, let's stand at the second 1 and 12 frames. And place the pre-comp here, to tell After Effects that at this point in time, we want this pre-comp to arrive here, before it reaches its last position. So what will happen now is that the icon will come from below, rise up, and then reach its last position. And now, let's decide, when the icon reaches this point, its size should be 100. And at the start of its animation, its size will be 20. Let's see how this looks. To focus on the icon animation, we can turn off the text animation for now. So let's do it, and see it one more time. Alright, so in my opinion, this animation is super slow, which makes sense because the entire animation is 3 seconds long. Let's shorten it to 2 seconds. To do that, we'll stay here with the time indicator. Then, select all the keyframes. Now, hold the Alt key, and move the last keyframes toward the time indicator, while holding the Shift key as well. Now let's improve the animation by easing those keyframes. Because right now, the motion is linear and boring, so select them, and press F9. Let's see how it looks now. Now, I want the icon to hang in the air a bit longer when it reaches this point. To do that, we need to adjust the velocity of the keyframes. This time, we'll do it through the graph editor, not the keyframe velocity panel. So, while all the keyframes are selected, let's go to the graph editor. Now, right-click to ensure we're in the speed graph, and make sure Snap is enabled. If you can't see the keyframes and curves, you can click here and zoom out a bit. Okay, now let's select these keyframes in the middle and drag their handles to the left without leaving a straight line. Now, select them again and move these handles to the right. By doing this, we have changed the speed between the keyframes. The duration of the animation hasn't changed, it's still within 2 seconds. We've just made the layer enter faster, hover in the air longer, and then quickly reach its final point. This way, we can take full control of the keyframes and create a more interesting animation. Alright, now let's make the icon drop a bit faster to its final position. To do that, let's select the last keyframes and drag these handles here. According to this curve, we can see that the speed of the keyframes will be very high at this point in time. Let's see how it looks. Looks awesome. Alright, now let's click here to return to our regular timeline and start creating the icon's swap animation. We want this animation to happen when the icon pre-comp is hovering in the air. For this, let's go into the icon's pre-comp. Now, let's zoom in on the timeline until we see the numbers here as frames. And now, let's learn how to create the swap animation between these layers. First, we need to decide how many seconds or frames we want to see these layers for. Let's say we want to see these layers for just 5 frames. Let's stand here with the time indicator. Now, turn on all the layers, select them, and the next thing we need to do is to cut them to a length of 5 frames. For this, we can use a shortcut, Alt and the right bracket. This way, the layers will be cut to the time indicator position. Now, we need to create the transition between the layers. Instead of moving these layers one by one manually, we can use the sequence layers function. To do that, we can select the last layer, hold the Shift key, and select the first layer. Now, right-click on one of the layers, go to Keyframe Assistant, and choose Sequence Layers, and hit OK. Here, we can see that the layers are placed one after the other in the order we selected. I'll explain what I mean. Let's press Ctrl-Z to undo the action. And this time, select the layers from the top, not from the bottom as before. And now, when we create the sequence, it will start with the first layer we selected. This is better for us, because we want the last icon to be seen, is this one. Alright, now let's go back to the main composition. And now, if we check the animation up close, it looks like the icon's swap animation begins too early, and the last icon disappears at the end of the transition. If we go back to this pre-comp, we can see that the layer ends here. That is why we stopped to see it in the main comp. Let's extend it so we can see it until the end of this composition. Okay, now let's go back to the main composition and find a point in time where we want the icon swap to start. I'd like it to start from this point, around frame 18. Let's stand here with the time indicator. Go into the icon's pre-comp, select all the layers, and drag them to the time indicator position. Now, if we move to the beginning of this animation, we will not see the first icon here. To see the first icon until that moment, we need to select this layer and extend it like this. Let's see how this timing looks in the main composition. Alright, I think we can delay the icon transition a bit. So let's go back to this pre-comp, select all the layers, and move them here. Let's check the timing again. I think it should start earlier. So let's go back to the icon's pre-comp, and move the layers here. Great, I think it looks better now. Now let's press Ctrl-S to save the project before we move on. And now, let's add a cool rotation animation to the icon's pre-comp. Let's go to the beginning of the animation, and press R. Now, create the first keyframe for rotation at the current value. Now let's press U to see the other keyframes on this pre-comp. Then, go to the end of the animation and change the rotation value to 1 full rotation. Let's hide this layer for a moment. Now, during the motion, the icons also rotate. Next, let's convert the keyframes easy ease. And let's synchronize the icon's animation with the text animation. To understand from which point in time the icon should enter the scene, we need to move forward and backward with the time indicator, while watching what is happening in the scene. I'm trying to find a moment in time when the text almost completes its animation. Let's decide that the icons will enter the scene at second 1. Let's see how it looks together with the text. Alright, I think the timing is excellent. And now, we are ready to work on this part of the animation, where the letters react to the icon's movement. For this, let's enter the text pre-comp. We can enlarge this panel. Now, place the time indicator at the second 3 and 3 frames, where all the letters complete their animation. Now, because we know we're going to animate the position property, we need to make sure that all the anchor points of the layers are centered. I'll select this layer and zoom in a bit so you can see it better. As you can see, the anchor points of the layers are not centered. This happened because when we centered the anchor points of the layers, we were at a point in time when the letters hadn't finished their animation. Therefore, After Effects centered their anchor points relative to the layer boundaries at that moment. So it's very important to be at a point in time when the letter animations are completely finished. Somewhere after the 3rd second. Anyway, let's select them, and press the shortcut Ctrl-Alt-Home to reposition the anchor points. Alright, so now all the anchor points are centered in the layer's center. Let's go to second number 3. Press P, and start animating the position of these layers. Let's create the first keyframes for all the layers because we know that at this point, the letters need to be where they currently are. Now, let's move on to second number 4. Hold down the Shift key and move the layers up, using the arrow keys on the keyboard. Move the layers up until the point when you got enough room to insert another letter beneath the existing one. Somewhere around here. That's enough. Now, let's go back to the main composition and synchronize the two animations, the icons and the letter animations. Let's delay the entrance of the icons a bit in the scene. Move the icons pre-comp across the timeline, while checking how that looks with the text animation. My goal is to start the animation of the icon a few frames before the text has completed its animation. Alright, this looks like a nice timing. And now, let's time the up animation of the text, so it will feel like it's affected by the icon's motion. This is a great point in time, because the icon is just about crossing the text. So let's enter the text composition and adjust the animation we created to match this moment. Select all the keyframes. We can enlarge this panel to ensure we selected them all. And now, move them to the position of the time indicator. Let's see how it looks alongside the icons. Awesome, I think the timing is excellent. Now let's find a point in time when we want to move the letters down, to get the illusion that they are all affected by the icon movement. I see that at this point in time, the icons have already landed. This means that at this moment, we can start creating the animation for the letters dropping. So let's go into the text composition and move the layers below to stand under this point, because this point represents the initial position of the letters. In the meantime, we don't want to return them to their original position, because we're creating the animation of them going down and then returning to their positions. So now, let's use the arrow key to bring the layers below their initial position. That's enough. Now, let's move on to the 5th second, and bring the letters back to their original positions. You can use these points as a reference point to know where is the right place to move the layers, since these points represent the initial position keyframes for these layers. Alright, after creating the position animation, let's see how it looks with the icons. In my opinion, it looks good for now. Now, let's go back to the text comp and improve the motion we've created for the text. We can make this panel a bit larger. So first, let's select the keyframes we created for the position, and press F9 to ease all of them. Now, I want the rise motion of the letters to be very fast. To do that, let's select these keyframes and go to the graph editor. Now, drag these handles to the left. This makes the animation fast at this point. Now, I want the drop of the letters to be fast too. To achieve this, let's select these keyframes again and drag these handles to the right. Now the text drops faster. And now, let's go back to the main composition and see how it looks with the icons. I think it looks great. And now, let's create an offset in the animation we've made. This means the first letters that start going up should be closer to the icons. To do that, let's go back to the text composition. Now, let's exit the graph editor to see all the keyframes. We can enlarge this panel a bit. Now, since we know that the letter closest to the icons should start its animation first, we won't touch its keyframes. They are already in the perfect timing. So let's select the rest of the keyframes and move them forward in time. But instead of doing it manually, let's do it with a super useful shortcut. Hold Alt and use the arrow keys. In our case, it's the right arrow key, because we want to move these keyframes forward in time, after the keyframes of the letter I. So, hold Alt and press the right arrow key once. We've moved these keyframes one frame forward. Now, let's select only these keyframes and move them one frame forward as well. We'll keep doing this until we reach the keyframes for the letter N. Once done, let's do the same for the layers that make up the word motion. So select these keyframes and move them forward in time using Alt and the right arrow. Now, if we zoom in a bit, we can see that we've created an offset between all the keyframes. Let's see how it looks in the main composition. We can shrink this panel to see the scene better. In my opinion, the letters should start to move up earlier. To do that, let's go back to the text composition. Let's scale up this panel. And now, select the keyframes that make the letters go up and move them earlier by 4 frames. Let's check it now. It's too early. Let's delay it by 2 frames. Let's check it again. Awesome, it looks great now. And now, before we move on to the next part, don't forget to save the project by pressing Ctrl+S. Great! In the next part, we're going to create a super cool background animation for this scene, and much more. It's going to be awesome, so see you there. Welcome back. Let's create the background for our scene. For this, we can use the layer of the Illustrator file. Or we can create a new solid layer. Let's do it by creating a solid layer. But this time, we'll use a shortcut Ctrl+Y. Now let's select the eyedropper and sample the blue color from the background layer of the Illustrator layer. Next, let's change the name to BG, and click OK. Finally, let's move it to below all the layers. Now, let's create the entry animation for our background. For this, we need to create a circular mask for our solid. Let's see how to do it. First, we need to ensure that the solid layer is selected. Now, long press the rectangle tool, select the ellipse tool, and create a perfect circle by holding the Shift key while doing so. Now, let's move our mask to the center of the scene. To see the center, you can press the apostrophe key to show the grid. This way, we can see where the composition's center is. Now, let's go back to the selection tool, double-click on the mask's path, and move it to the center. You can also move it using the arrow keys on the keyboard. Now, our mask is hiding the background, but we need it to reveal the background. To do this, we need to invert the mask. Once done, let's animate this mask. Let's open the mask and adjust the mask expansion. Stand at the 0-second mark, and change the value until the background is fully visible. Let's create the first keyframe for this value, so that at this point in time, the mask should look like this. Now, move to the 2-second mark and change the value so that the entire background is visible. By bringing down the value of mask expansion, we can set it to -450. Or maybe -480. Let's see what we got. Let's solo the background to see that the mask is fully closed. Press the apostrophe key to turn off the grid. I can see that the mask is completely closed. If you don't close it all the way, you'll have a little gap in the background. so make sure your value is correct. Okay, now let's select the keyframes and press F9 to ease them. Then, hold the Alt key and double-click on one of them to adjust the velocity. Let's set it to 85 by 85. Now let's see how it looks. I think it's a bit slow, so let's move the last keyframe to the 1 second mark. That looks better. Okay, now let's unsolo this layer so we can see all the layers. We can also turn off the transparent background. And now, let's time the background animation we just created with the rest of the scene. I want the background to enter the scene shortly after the entrance of the text. So, let's move it here and see how it looks. I think it's excellent. Now we're ready to move on to the next stage to improve the look of our scene. For this, let's select the text animation composition and duplicate it with Ctrl D. Now, select this new composition and change its color using the fill effect. If you can't find the effects panel, you can locate it under Window. Alright, let's drag the effect onto this layer. We don't see anything because this layer is below another one. If we isolate this layer, we can see the effect's color. Now, let's change the color of the effect to the blue of the icons. So let's navigate to the point in time where we can see them. And now, sample this color using the eyedropper. And if I solo this layer, you will see that the color is indeed changed. And now, to make it look more interesting, we can create a little offset for the two text pre-comps. I'll show you what I mean. First, let's stand at the moment where the text is going up. And now, move the new text pre-comp 1 frame forward in time. Once done, let's duplicate this comp again, and move the button 1 frame forward. Then, change the color of this comp to the yellow of the slogan. To see the yellow color, go to the project panel, drag the slogan to the scene. Then, let's go back to the Effects Controls panel. Now, select this composition and sample the yellow color from here. And now, let's turn off this layer, and see how it looks. Okay, I think we can create a slightly larger offset between the text compositions. Let's move the button comp 1 frame forward, and see how that looks. I think we can move this pre-comp 1 frame forward as well. And the bottom one too. I think it looks better this way. And now, let's work on creating the animation for the slogan. I want the slogan to enter the scene just before the text completes its animation. Somewhere around here. So first, let's turn on the slogan layer. We can align it to the center of the comp using the Align tool. And now, as you can see, the slogan is one layer. It would be very complicated to separate all these letters into separate layers and animate them manually. To animate the slogan in a smarter way, we can use the text animators of After Effects. I'll show you what I mean. First, let's select the text tool and type the word learn. But before that, I want to give you a small tip about integration when working with After Effects and Illustrator. As you can see, the first letter in the word learn is currently in lowercase. Let's say we didn't notice this when designing the logo in Illustrator. We only noticed it in After Effects. To fix this quickly, we can right-click on this layer, go to Reveal, and select Reveal in Explorer. This way, After Effects will show us which file on our computer this layer is in. In our case, the file is already open. So now, we can delete the letter and type a capital L. Once done, we can go back to the Selection tool. Then, press Ctrl S to save the changes we made for this Illustrator file. Now, when we go back to After Effects, we'll see that the letter has also been replaced here. Anyway, let's go back to animating the text. So first, let's write the first word. For this, make sure you are using the Text tool. Then, click here once to open a text line and type learn _period. Next, double-click the text to select it and change the font. look for the font Montserrat, and select Montserrat Extra Bold. Then, change the color to yellow from the original layer, and change the font size to 50. Also, don't forget to go to the paragraph to ensure that the text is centered and aligned from left to right. Alright, now let's go back to the selection tool and place this word here. For now, we can turn off the slogan layer. Now, let's learn how to animate this text layer using animators. First, let's open the layer and select the text here. Next, click on the small arrow for animate and choose position, because we want to create a motion animation for this text. Now, you can see that a new animator has been added to this layer. Next, we need to set the point of change for this text. In our case, the text should come in from the bottom. So, let's set it to stand here. You can write 60. Now, open the range selector and advanced. Let's enlarge this panel to see all the parameters, and adjust the preview screen to see the text better. And now, here, we need to change the animator's shape to ramp up. This way, the text animation will start to move from the first letter. Now, using the offset parameter, we can control the position between the original position of the text and the changing point we set for this animator. And now, let's animate the offset to get a cool text animation. So, let's go to the beginning of the timeline and create the first keyframe for offset with a value of -100, which is the changing point we set for the position property of this animator. Now, move to the second number 1. Before we continue, let's isolate this layer so that we only see it. Okay, now, at this point in time, let's change the offset to 100, which is the original position of this text layer. Now let's improve this animation by changing the velocity of these keyframes. When using animators, we don't need to go into the keyframe velocity panel or the graph editor. We can control it directly from the animator. Let's write 20 in ease high and 80 in ease low. Great! Now let's hide the text when it's at the bottom. For this, we need to stand at the point in time where the text has already moved up. And now, all we need to do is right-click on the layer, go to Mask, and select New Mask. Let's see how it looks. Awesome! And now, let's close this layer, and let's add a cool scale animation to it. To do this, select the layer and press S. And now I want you to pay attention to how the layer is getting big. This is happening because the anchor point is here. So let's grab the anchor point tool and center the anchor point of this layer, while holding the Control key. This way, the anchor point will snap to the layer's center. Alright, and now let's not forget to switch back to the selection tool and start to animate the scale property. Make sure you're at the beginning of the timeline and create the first keyframe with a value of 0. Now move to frame 12 and change the value to 200. Or maybe 150. Now go to the second number 1 and set the value to 100. Next, select the keyframes and press F9. Finally, hold the Alt key and double-click on one of the keyframes to change the velocity. Set it to 85 and hit OK. Let's see how it looks now. I think it can look better with a different velocity. So let's press F9 to reset the keyframe velocity and bring them to regular easy ease keyframes. And this time, change the velocity using the graph editor. Let's select these keyframes and drag the handles to here, and these handle to the right. Let's see how it looks now. I think it looks better this way. I did this to remind you that sometimes it's better to control the velocity of keyframes through the graph editor. Alright, let's move on. Let's unhide this layer. Press T and reduce the opacity to 30 to make it easier to work with it as a reference. Let's also lock this layer so it won't interfere as we create the second word. Now we can simply duplicate this layer by using the shortcut Ctrl D. Then move this text here. Now, double-click and change the word to create. Don't forget to create a space and the dot after writing the text. Next, let's adjust the mask for the new word. Select the layer, press M to display the mask, delete it, and create a new one. Next, let's use a line to center this layer in the composition. We can move this word a bit to the left. You can delete the reference now, and move on. Now, duplicate this layer. Then, select the selection tool, and move it here. Next, double-click and change the word to enjoy. And once again, select the layer, press M, to display the mask, delete it, and create a new one. Once done, we can move this layer a bit to the left. Now, let's create an offset between these layers. Let's decide that the word learn should come first, so let's leave it in place. Next, we'll start the word create, 12 frames after learn, and the word enjoy, 12 frames after create. Let's see how it looks. I think it looks great. Now you can press Ctrl S to save the project before moving on. Alright, so now let's go back to the selection tool. Unisolate these layers to see the rest of the scene and close them. We can also shrink the composition panel. And now, let's set the preview screen to fit and find the time when we want the slogan words to come in. I think it's somewhere around here. So let's select these layers and move them here. Let's check how it looks. I think the timing is good. But I think we need to raise these layers a bit closer to the main text. So let's do it. While the text layers are selected, hold the Shift key and use the up arrow key to move them up. Somewhere around here. Okay, let's check it again. It looks excellent, and we're ready to move on. In the next step, we'll create a cool motion trail for our icons. For this, go to the Effects panel and look for an effect called Echo. Drag this effect onto the icon's pre-comp. Now, set it to -0.001. And set numbers of echoes to 30. And finally, choose Maximum for Echo Operator. Now, when this layer accelerates, we'll see a cool motion trail that looks like this. You can enlarge it using this parameter. But remember that the more numbers of echoes you add, the harder your computer will have to work to render the scene. So, don't overdo it with this effect. I'll change it to 50. I think that's enough. Now we're ready to move on to the next part, where we'll create the outro animation for our scene. See you there. But before you dive into the next lesson, I highly recommend that you take a 10-minute break. Get up from your chair, do some light stretching, and drink a glass of water. This will help you to recharge your brain for the next lesson. Welcome back. Let's get started with creating the outro animation. First off, let's select the text layers and give them a yellow color so we can easily identify them. Now, let's create the outro for the icons pre-comp. First, we need to decide when we want the icons to leave the scene. Let's say it happens around the 6-second mark. To make this happen, we need to select the icon's composition and press P to see all the keyframes for the position property. Now, pay attention. If we simply move it away and check the animation, it will immediately start moving to its new position. But that's not what we want. We want it not to move up until the second 6. We want it to start exiting the scene from second 6, that is, after all the letters finish their animation. This means we need to create a pause in the animation for a couple of seconds. Creating a pause in an animation is super easy. All you gotta do is create keyframes with the same value as the last keyframe. To do this, click here. Now we created a new keyframe with the same value as the previous one, which means that the layer will not move during this period of time. This will create a pause in the animation. Now, let's move to second 7 and move the layer here. Then, let's move to the second 8 and move the layer here. Finally, let's move to second 9 and drag this layer from the scene. As you can see, we've created a path for the exit animation of the icon. Now, let's round the corners of this path to make the motion of the layer move smoother. To do that, hold the Alt and Control keys, and click once on the point you want to round. You can also round the corners using the Vertex tool, found under the Pen tool. So select the Vertex tool, and click once on the point you want to round. After we finish with this tool, let's not forget to go back to the selection tool. Now, we can tweak the handles and points of the path until we achieve the movement we want. So let's design the path in a nice curvy look, so the motion of the icons will look nice and natural. Let's also round this point. But first, move the time indicator here, so the icon doesn't get in the way. Now, hold down the Alt and Control keys and click once on the point. Let's move this handle like this. To see the path better, we can isolate this layer to see only it in the preview screen. And now, let's see how it looks. The path we made for this layer looks great. And now, let's make the animation even better. I want this layer to start moving very quickly as it exits. To do this, let's select these keyframes and go to the graph editor. Now, let's move these handles here to change the velocity of these keyframes. Moving these handles like this will make this layer start to move very quickly at this point in time. Now, let's make this layer exit the scene very quickly. To do that, let's select these keyframes and move this handle here. Let's see how it looks. Okay, the start looks good, and the exit looks good. But as you can see, the icon has a couple of strange pauses in the middle of its motion. Let's return to the regular timeline and see how to fix this. This is happening because of these keyframes. To fix it, we need to change those keyframes to continuous keyframes. To do that, you just have to select them, hold the Control key, and click on them twice. This will transform the ease keyframes into continuous keyframes, and you'll see that the animation flows smoothly without any weird pauses. Alright, and now, let's bring this keyframe closer to the previous ones and make the animation faster at this point in time. We can speed this up a little more, so let's drag this keyframe closer to the first one. That's better. Now, let's adjust the other keyframes accordingly. Let's get a bit closer and fine-tune the keyframes. Playing around with the keyframes will give you a better understanding of how to control your animation. So if you feel like you need to learn more about it, you are more than welcome to watch my guide to After Effects for Beginners for free. Find the link in the PDF file found in the main folder of this course. Okay, I think that looks great. Now, let's unisolate this layer and continue to create an outro animation for the other layers. Let's create the exit animation for the main text. For this, let's go to the point where the text animation ends. For example, here at second 6. Now, press Alt and the right bracket to cut these layers to this point. And now, let's find a better time for the text to finish its animation. So move around with the time indicator, while watching what is happening in the scene. I see that at this point in time, the text is finished with the animation. Next, let's cut these layers again using Alt and the right bracket. Let's zoom out a bit in the timeline. Now, press Ctrl D to duplicate all these pre-comps. After that, let's move them here so they are side by side. Then, let's make these pre-comps play from the end to the beginning, to create a reverse animation. To do this, right-click on one of them, go to Time, and choose Time Reverse Layer. Now, we need to align these layers so they all start from the same point in time. You can hold the Shift key while moving it, to snap it exactly with the other layer. And now, place them exactly where we cut the original 3 layers. It's important to zoom in and check that there's no gap between the layers. And with this, we have finished creating the outro animation for the text of the logo. And now, let's sync the outro of the icons with the text outro. To do this, select the icon's composition and press P to view the position keyframes. Let's start moving the icon from this point in time. Just a moment before the letter I start moving upwards. So, select these keyframes and move them here. Let's get closer to the timeline and see how that looks. I think it should happen sooner. I think the timing is great now. And now I want the icon to hover more time in the air before exiting the scene. For this, we can move the last 2 keyframes a bit forward in time. Now, there is a larger distance between these 2 keyframes, and that means that it will take the icons more time to get from this point to this point, which creates a longer animation of the icon hovering in the air before exiting the scene. Great, and now let's create an outro animation for the background. First, we need to decide when we want it to happen. For now, let's say that here at the second 9 and 12 frames is a good time. So first, select the background and hit U to see its keyframes. Now, copy these keyframes with Ctrl-C and paste them here using Ctrl-V. Now, we can reverse these keyframes to get a reverse animation. To do that, right-click on one of them, go to Keyframe Assistant, and choose Time Reverse Keyframes. And now, let's find the right moment for the background to exit. I want the background to start exiting when the icon leaves the frame. Somewhere around here. Let's see how this looks. Okay, now since the background here has already done its job, we can cut this layer. Question: what is the keyboard shortcut to cut the layer from the right side? We can do it by pressing Alt and the right bracket. Now, let's create an outro animation for the slogan. Let's say we want them to exit the scene from second number 7. And let's use a scale animation to create the outro animation. For that, select all the text layers and press S. Now, let's create keyframes with the current scale value, as we want the text to stay the same size until this point in time. Now, let's move to second 8. And change the scale to 0. Next, let's select all the keyframes and adjust the velocity using the graph editor like this. Once done, exit the graph editor and let's create an offset for the exit animation of these layers. It looks good, but I think it should happen sooner. That's better. Alright, now let's hit Ctrl-S to save the project. We can close all the layers and move on to the final part of this lesson, where we will learn super cool tricks to make our animation look unique. And we will do it in the next part. So see you there. Welcome back. Let's learn how we can make our scene look more visually interesting. The first thing we're going to do is create a new adjustment layer. Then, let's search for the effect called CC Lens and drag it onto it. Now, let's increase the size here. As you can see, this effect makes the scene look more interesting by distorting it slightly. Let's set the size to 150. And now, we can make it even more interesting by animating this property. So, let's go to the beginning of the timeline and create the first keyframe with the current value. Now press U to see the keyframes we've created for the effect. Next, let's move to the second number 2 and change the size to 500. Then, convert the keyframes to easy ease, and let's see how it looks. We can move these keyframes forward in time, let's say to the second number 1, so the effect stays a bit longer in the scene. I want the effect to end when the last letter finishes its animation. Great, and now, let's select the effect here, press Enter, and copy the effect's name using Ctrl-C. Once done, select the adjustment layer, press Enter, and paste the name. This way, we'll know which effect is on this adjustment layer. Okay, and now, let's create a cool zoom-in animation when the icon hovers in the air. To do this, we'll need to create another adjustment layer above all the layers, and apply a transform effect. So let's create a new adjustment layer. Now search for the transform effect, and drag it onto the new adjustment layer. And now, we need to stand at moment when the icon enters the scene, and create a keyframe for the scale property of the transform effect. After that, press U to see the keyframe, and move to the moment when the icon is already landing, and create another keyframe with the same value as before. Finally, let's go to the middle of these keyframes, and change the value to 130. And with this, we have created a zoom in and zoom out for the scene, from the moment the icon enters until it lands. But as you can see, during the zoom, you might notice that the icon goes outside the frame. But don't worry, we can fix it with the Transform Effects Position property. This means we can adjust the position relative to what's happening in the scale animation. Alright, so at this point in time, we are good with the position of the scene, so we'll create keyframes with this value. Now press U to see the new keyframes. Then, go to the moment of the zoom in, and move the scene downwards. Next, let's go to the end of the zoom animation, copy the first keyframe, and paste it here. Now let's select all the keyframes and hit F9 to convert them to easy ease. Let's see how it looks now. Looks nice. And now, while all the keyframes are selected, let's go to the graph editor and adjust this animation. Let's select the middle keyframes and drag this handle to the left. And then, drag these handles to the right. I love it. After finishing creating the zoom in and out animation, let's exit the graph editor. And now, let's copy the effect's name and paste it on this adjustment layer. Great! Now let's go back to our icon and improve its animation a bit. Let's make the icon grow when it hovers in the air before it exits the scene. So let's select this layer and press S to see the scale property. Actually, we can press the U key to see all the keyframes on this layer, so that we can time the animation we will create with the position animation we already have. This means from this point, when the icon starts to exit, we'll set it to be the current size. And when it reaches this area, we'll increase it to 100%, or even 150. And now, let's shrink this layer when it exits the scene. Let's set the size to 0, and see how it looks. Okay, I think we can start the shrinking a bit earlier. So let's move this keyframe here. Now let's select all the scale keyframes and change the velocity through the graph editor, like this. Let's see how it looks. I think we shouldn't reduce it to size 0 at the end. Let's stand at the last keyframe and change it to 50. But I think the icon's exit animation happens too slowly. To speed this up, we can select the last keyframes and drag them here. Let's also adjust the position of this keyframe and see what we've got. I think the up animation of the icons is happening too fast. So let's get closer to the timeline and move this keyframe a bit to the right. Let's see how it looks now. Alright, and now, after finishing adjusting the icon's animation, let's adjust the timing of the exit animation of the background. For this, select this layer and press U to see its keyframes. Now, move them to the point in time when the icon has almost exited the scene. Okay, now let's step back a bit, close all the layers, and create an additional effect called posterize time. With this effect, the motion in the footage becomes more stuttered and choppy, similar to the look of an old-fashioned animation. For this effect to affect all the layers, let's create a new adjustment layer above all the layers. Now, let's go to the Effects panel and type posterize time. Drag the effect onto the adjustment layer. Now change the value to 12. And if we see the animation now, we can see that the animation is a bit choppy. Let's see how all the animation looks with this effect. If you like this style, you can lower the frame rate to 8. Anyway, I prefer to keep it at 12. Now, let's just copy the name of the effect and paste it onto the adjustment layer. Okay, now I want to teach you a cool trick that you can use when working with adjustment layers. As you can see, the posterized time effect is on the adjustment layer. This adjustment layer affects everything beneath it. This means we can create a mask for this layer, and choose which parts of the scene will be affected by the effect and which ones will not. Let me show you what I mean. Let's select the ellipse tool, press and hold, and now choose the rectangle tool. Make sure we are selecting the adjustment layer with the posterized time effect. Now, let's stand in a frame where we can see most of the letters. Somewhere around here. Then, let's create a mask like this. Now, we've created a small glitch in this part of the scene. This happens because only this area is affected by the posterized time effect. And now, we can mask other areas in the scene to create a more interesting look. For example, we can create another mask here. And another one here. In these parts, the animation moves at 12 frames per second, and in other parts, it moves at 24 frames per second, which is the original frame rate of the composition we started with. Alright, let's see how it looks all together. And now, if we want to change the shape of the mask, we can switch to the selection tool, double-click the mask, and then change its shape or move it to a different location. To move to the next mask, press Enter and then select the second mask. You don't have to create these masks if you don't love the overall look they create. Alright, so after we've prepared all the effects, we're ready to render our animation. But before that, let's do one more thing. I want the zoom animation to start only after the last letter finishes its animation. To do that, let's select the adjustment layer with the transform effect and delay the start of the animation on this layer. Move with the time indicator while watching the preview screen to find a moment in time when the last letter is already in the scene. Let's move these keyframes here. Now, the letter N finishes its animation, and only then the zoom animation begins. Let's see the entire animation one more time before rendering the project. Okay, now we're ready to render our project. First, let's go to the time point where the animation is fully complete, which is around second 11. Now, let's trim the work area to this time point, to avoid rendering unnecessary parts. To do this, press the N key. Now, let's learn how to render this animation with a transparent background. You can turn the transparent background back on. So, to render it with a transparent background, first, we need to go to the Render Queue panel. To do this, press Ctrl M. Let's click here to change the final output to QuickTime. In Format Options, select Animation. And then click OK. Now, in Channels, choose RGB plus Alpha. This tells After Effects to render the animation without a background. Once done, click OK. Now let's choose where to render the animation. Render it to our Renders folder. Now, make sure the name is good. Then, click Save and Render. Now let's wait for a moment. Awesome! And now, let's go back to our main composition and learn how to combine our render with other videos if we want to create a transition between two videos and use it as an animated bumper. You don't have to do this with me, I just want to show you the process so you know how it's done. So first, let's go back to the project panel and press Ctrl N to create a new composition. Now, name it Test Comp. Next, change the dimensions to Full HD, 24 frames per second, and a duration of 20 seconds. Click OK. Now let's import two videos into our project. I'll choose videos I used in one of my courses, but you can choose any video you have on your computer. Alright, I'll drag one of the videos into the composition and scale it down. Now I'll import the video we just rendered. Now, place it above the video in the composition, and move our render to the second number one. Now, when we see the background of our animation is about to open up, we can cut the video layer and add another video. Let me show you what I mean. I will stand here with the time indicator at the moment when the background needs to open up. Then, I will crop the video footage up until this moment. Now, I will insert another video to start exactly from this point in time. Now, when the background opens up, we will see the second video. This way, we've created a cool logo transition. Let's see how that looks all together. Alright, so after showing you this process, I'll delete this composition because I don't really need it. I'll also delete both videos and the render of the animation. Now let's render it as an MP4 file. Let's use the shortcut and press Ctrl M. Now, in output mode, we will choose H.264, 40 Mbps. Then, we need to choose where to render the video. Now, make sure the name is good. Next, we can press Save. And finally, click on the Render button. Now, let's wait a couple of minutes. Let's see what we've got. Great! Looks awesome! Now, let's go back to our main project and organize it before we close it. We can close these panels and the open pre-comps. And now, let's start by creating a new folder in the project panel called Assets. Drag the folder with the logo layers and the solids folder into it. Now, create another folder called Pre-comps. You can label the main composition with a different color than the other pre-comps. Now drag all the pre-comps we created during the project into this folder, except for the main composition. Finally, to make it look more organized, click here and here. You can close the effects panel now and press Ctrl S to save the project. Now, you can also exit Illustrator. And before we finish, let's reset the tools to their original state. Now you can exit the project. I hope you enjoyed this one, and I can't wait to see you in the next lesson, when we will create a super interesting logo animation for an imaginary tech company. It's going to be awesome. See you there. But before you dive into the next lesson, I highly recommend that you take a 10-minute break. Get up from your chair, do some light stretching, and drink a glass of water. This will help you to recharge your brain for the next lesson. Hi there! I hope you found the lessons helpful and learned some new and interesting things. To better remember everything we covered, I highly recommend practicing by completing this homework assignment. Your task is to recreate this cool animation. You have the freedom to change the colors and add any additional graphics you like. And whenever you face any issues or have some questions, feel free to check the AE project file to see the steps I took. Additionally, you can always reach out to me for help. Good luck! Hey everyone, and welcome back! In this lesson, we'll create an impressive logo animation for a fictional IT company, focused on data collection. The animation includes 4 key animated scenes that we'll create individually, before stitching them together seamlessly with perfect timing. Throughout this lesson, we'll use a very handy built-in script in After Effects. We'll use some expressions, create complex keyframes, and learn many valuable techniques for working efficiently with After Effects. I'm sure you're gonna love this one, so let's not waste any more time and dive right into the lesson. Alright, so let's start with the lesson. I hope you're ready for this because this lesson is going to be super interesting. So, as always, let's start the lesson by taking a look at how the logo was made in Illustrator. For this, let's open the main folder we created for the course and enter the AI folder. Now let's open the third logo design. To see the same panel arrangement, let's go to Window, Workspace, and select Automation. Great! And now as you can see, this design is also divided into several layers. There is a background layer, an icon layer of the logo, and a layer of the main text. The text layer is a regular text layer, written in the Ezra font. And now, before we proceed to create the logo animation, we need to think of an interesting way to animate it. That's why, as I always say, it's very important to create an initial sketch of the idea that can connect with the concept of this specific logo. So let's open the sketch idea for this logo, and see how I planned it. Since it's a logo for an imaginary tech company dealing with data collection, I thought it would be cool for all the data to converge to a single point and create the logo icon, which is the sphere. Then, this sphere opens a portal from which all the letters of the logo comes out. Alright, enough with the talking, let's open After Effects. We can close this window. And now, let's click on Default. For all of us to see the same panels, now let's create our first composition. We'll name it Logo Animation 3. We'll work in the full HD format, so set the width to 1920 and the height to 1080 pixels. Change the frame rate to 30 and set the duration to 20 seconds. Finally, let's choose the background color for the composition. Let's go with black. Alright, and now, let's import the logo design into the project now. First, double-click in the empty area in the project panel. Then, go to the AI folder and select the third logo design. Make sure not to select this function and click Import. And now, as you already know, we need to choose Composition, because we want to import this file with separate layers. And here, we select Layer Size, because we want the layer boundaries to match the object size, not the document size. Great, and now we can see the folder, including all the Illustrator file layers. Moreover, you can see the new composition with the same name as the Illustrator file, created automatically. When you enter the composition, you'll see the logo separated into layers, exactly like in the original Illustrator file. Alright, let's close this pre-comp and start the lesson. But before that, let's not forget to save the project and give it a name. So go to File, and click on Save. Now, let's find the folder we created for the lesson. Go to the AE folder and name the project file we're currently working on. We can click on this project to sample the name, and then adjust the name to Logo Animation 3_ into data. Then click Save. So first, let's create the animation for the data lines we see in the example. To make it easier to work, let's show the composition's grid. For this, press the apostrophe key. And now, let's start creating the data lines. So first, let's select the pen tool. Next, turn off the fill, and change the stroke color to gray. Press OK, and leave the thickness at 5 for now. Then, let's create the first point here. Hold down the Shift key and create another point here. This will make the line straight. Now, let's increase the line thickness to 10. Next, center the anchor point of this layer, using the shortcut Ctrl-Alt-Home. And now, let's center the layer in the composition center using Ctrl-Home. Once done, let's create the small sphere that's supposed to move along with the line. To do this, press and hold on the rectangle tool, and select the ellipse tool. Now, let's ensure we're not selecting any layer, and create the sphere while holding the Shift key to keep it symmetrical. Next, let's color it gray, and remove the stroke. Great! And now, we can close the layer, select it and press Enter, to change the name to Sphere. Then, change the name of this layer to Stroke. And now, let's tag this layer with a different color, so we can differentiate it from the others. Alright, and now let's learn how to make the sphere move along the line's path, and animate it during the motion. For this, we'll use a built-in script in After Effects. Let's see how to do it. First, we need to open the layer, go to Contents, open the shape, open the path, and select it. If you don't select the path, the script won't work. And to open the script, go to Window, scroll down, and click on Create Nulls from Paths. This opens a small panel for this script. In our case, we'll use the Trace Path function. You can close it, and as you can see, a new null object has been created in the scene. Let's go back to the selection tool and understand what's happening here. But first, let's understand what is a null object. In After Effects, a null object is a type of layer that does not render or appear on the preview screen, but can be used as a reference point for other layers in the composition. It's an invisible layer that can be used to control the position, rotation, scale, and other properties of other layers in the composition. One of the main advantages of using a null object is that it allows you to control multiple layers at once, rather than having to adjust each layer individually. For example, you can parent several layers to a null object and then control the layers with the null. So, as we move along the timeline, you'll notice that the null object is following the line's path. It's cool, but the object keeps repeating this motion each time it reaches the end of the path, which is not what we want. So let's stop the null object from doing this. And first, let's try to understand what makes him do this. So, let's open the null layer, go to Effects, and you'll see an effect called Trace Path on it. Inside this effect, there are two keyframes in the property called Progress. The null layer is repeating due to an expression on this property. You can spot the expression by the red color of the property's value. Let's adjust the expression on this property and stop from the null to repeat its movement. And to access the expression panel, select the layer and press the E key twice. Now, let's select the first line and delete just this part. This line of code makes the null loop endlessly. Click here to finish the action. Make sure you delete exactly what I've deleted, otherwise it won't work. And as you can see, it moves from the start to the end of the path for 1 second. It's too fast for us. So, let's go to the second number 3, and move the last keyframe here. Now, this animation lasts for 3 seconds, not 1 second as before. Awesome! And now, let's learn how to connect the sphere to null. We can do this with the help of the parent and link function, which is located here. Parenting is a relationship between two layers in which one layer, the child, is attached to and follows the motion of another layer, the parent. When you parent a layer to another layer, any motion or transformation applied to the parent layer is also applied to the child layer. This is useful for creating complex animations, such as characters or vehicles, where the movement of one part affects the movement of another. Linking, on the other hand, is a more flexible relationship that allows you to control one property or parameter of a layer based on another. Alright, and now, let's parent the sphere's layer to the null layer. To do this, we will drag the pick whip of the sphere's layer to the null layer. This will ensure that when the null moves, the sphere will move with it. If we want to disable the parenting, we can click here and select None. As you can understand, we need the sphere to be placed in the area of the null here, and then connected to null. But if you don't want to make it manually, you can link the sphere in a way that it automatically attaches to the position of null. Let's see what I mean. Let's hold the Shift key, and now drag the pick whip of the sphere to null. Now, the sphere is positioned at the anchor point of null, which means it's at the location of null. In the next step, we need to create a more interesting path for our line. To do that, let's select the layer of the line, choose the pen tool, get closer, and create additional points in these areas. Let's create one point here, one here, another one here, and the last one here. Now, let's select this point, hold the Shift key, and select this point. Next, let's lift both of these points up. If we want to change the shape of this part, we need to select this point and move it. To select it, hold the Alt key and select it like this. Now let's move it here. Now, let's select this point and move it as well. Great! Now, let's do the same on the other side. So, let's create 4 points in this area. Now, select the 2 middle points, and this time, move them down. Let's rearrange the points a bit. Awesome! We can step back a bit. and continue adjusting the form of this line. For this, let's hold the Alt key, select these points, and move them here. Next, let's move these points here. And maybe we can move the bottom points up a bit. Let's do the same with these ones. Okay, let's see how it looks. Looks good. Now, it's an excellent time to press Ctrl S to save the project before we move on. And now, let's learn how to make these corners rounded. To do that, let's open the layer of the line. You can close the shape now. Next, let's select Contents, and add a new effect to the contents of this layer called Round Corners. If you zoom in a bit, you'll see a significant improvement in the corners. Let's open the new property and increase the radius. Set it to 20. Great! And now, let's learn how to make the sphere reveal the line during the motion. Let's set the preview screen to fit. And now, select the shape within the contents of this layer, and add the trim paths effect. Next, enlarge this panel a bit. And then, open the effect. And now, by changing the value of the property called End, we can control the line drawing. And to connect this property to the sphere's motion, we need to access the Progress property under the Trace Path effect. That is found in the Null layer. Let's close all the parameters, and then open just the Progress property, to see only it. And now, since our sphere is connected to the null, it will appear as if the sphere is revealing the line. To make this work, we must link the End property of the effect to the Progress property of null. And now, when the null is moving, the sphere is moving with it, and the End property of the Trim Path effect moves with the sphere. Looks great. Let's move on. We can set the preview screen back to fit. Now, to make this animation look more interesting, let's make the back part of the line disappear in relation to the sphere's motion. And we can do it using the Start property of the Trim Path effect. So, let's decide that the line will start to disappear from the second number 1. Let's create a keyframe for the Start property with the current value. Now, let's go to the end of the sphere's animation, at the third second, and change the value to 100. Let's see how it looks. It looks fine. Now, let's close the layers and improve the animation. So first, to improve the animation, we need to see all the keyframes we have in this scene. So let's make sure we're not selecting any layer and press U. And now, let's start improving the motion of the sphere. So, let's select these keyframes, press F9, and change the velocity through the graph editor. Right-click here to make sure we're in the speed graph. Now, let's select these keyframes and move the handle here. To make the sphere move slowly at the beginning, and then increase speed towards the end. Let's turn off the layer for the line and see how it looks. Now, let's move on to improve the motion of the line animation. Because now, the motion of the line is not synchronized with the motion of the sphere. So let's go back to the timeline. Select these keyframes, press F9, and change the velocity through the graph editor. Let's select these keyframes and move the handle here. To make the line disappear slowly at the beginning and then increase speed towards the end. And now, I want to adjust the look of the path we got here. And to do this, let's select the pen tool and adjust the shape of the line a bit. Click on one of the points. Now, hold the Alt key and select the points in this section. Let's move this part here. And now, let's move this part a bit to the left. Let's see how that looks now. Okay, now let's adjust a very small detail that nobody will see, but is important to know about it. Let's zoom a bit and see how the end of this path looks. As you can see, the line ends in a straight line. Let's learn how to round it. To do this, let's close and reopen the layer to see all the parameters. Now, open stroke and change the line cap to round cap. Now it looks better. Let's also change round join here. Okay, And now we can close all the parameters and layers. Set the preview screen to fit, switch back to the selection tool, and move on. Now, let's create a scale animation for the sphere. Go to second 0. Select this layer and press S to see the scale parameter. Now change the value to 0 and create the first keyframe with this value. Next, let's move to frame 15 and set the scale to 100. Then, let's copy these keyframes. Go to the second 3 and paste them here. Now, right-click on one of the keyframes, go to Keyframe Assistant, and select Time Reverse Keyframes to reverse this animation. Now the sphere will shrink when it reaches its last point. I think it should shrink before reaching the end. To see when the sphere reaches its last point, let's select the null layer and press U. Next, let's move the scale animation of the sphere here, so that the sphere will disappear just before it finishes its motion. And now, let's select these keyframes, press F9, and change the velocity through the graph editor in this way. Let's see how it looks. Excellent. We can go back to the timeline. With this, we're done with the first part of our animation. And since we know that in the future, we will need to duplicate this animation a few times, it's best to nest all the layers into a single composition. It would be a hassle to duplicate the layers one by one. Okay, so let's select all the layers and press Ctrl-Shift-C. We'll call it Data Line 1. Make sure both of these are checked and hit OK. Now let's enter this pre-comp and adjust the size and length of this composition. To do this, we need to enter this composition settings, so press Ctrl-K. And now, adjust the height dimensions of this composition. Make sure Preview is checked to see what you are doing. Let's set it to 400. Now let's shorten the composition duration to 3 seconds, because we know that our animation ends at second 3. And there you go, our composition is ready, and we are ready to move on. Let's go back to our main composition. In the next part, we'll make another animation similar to what we did, but with some small tweaks. We will play around with the sphere's size, line thickness, and the colors of the objects. See you in the next part. Welcome back. So let's learn how to duplicate comps like a pro. First, it's important to know that in order to successfully change the design within the duplicated composition, we need to duplicate this composition through the project panel, and not through the layers panel. This way, we can make changes inside the duplicated comp without affecting the original. I'll show you what I mean. Let's find our composition in the project panel, select it, and press Ctrl-D to duplicate it. Now, we have created a new composition, and its suffix has been automatically changed to 2. Now, let's enter this new composition and make some design changes. We'll start by changing the color of the stroke layer. Let's make it white. Next, let's change the color of the sphere to white as well. Now, let's bring this composition into our main composition and see that the changes affect only the new composition, which is great because we want to have some varieties of this data animation. Alright, and now, let's arrange this pre-comp in the scene. First, we can press S and set the size of this composition to 70. Then, right-click on it, go to Transform, and choose Flip Vertical. Now, I want the sphere to reach the center of the scene in the end. To do this, let's go to the end of this animation to see the last position of the sphere. And now, let's drag this pre-comp to the place where we will see the sphere in the center. Somewhere around here. Let's check that the sphere reaches the center exactly. Great, now I want the large sphere not to be visible in the scene when it is created. To do this, let's move this composition here. Let's see how it looks. It looks great. Now let's tag this layer with a brighter color so we can differentiate it from the other compositions. And now, let's create a similar animation from this side. To do this, we'll duplicate these two compositions using Ctrl-D. Next, bring the new compositions here side by side. And to flip both of them precisely, right-click here and create a new null. Now, connect the two new compositions to the null using parent and link. Then, select the null, right-click, go to Transform, and choose Flip Horizontal. For randomness in the scene, right-click on the null, and go to Transforms once again, but this time, choose Vertical. This looks a bit more interesting. Okay, and now let's unparent these two compositions from the null, and let's create a similar animation from this side. For this, we'll duplicate these compositions once more, move them up, and connect them to the null. Now select the null, press R to display the rotation property, and rotate it to -90 degrees. Looks good. Once done, unparent these compositions from the null, and duplicate them one more time. Move the new ones up, connect them to the null, and rotate the null to -270 degrees. So basically, we've used the null and the parent and link function to design and position our layers in the scene. Now that we're done with that, we no longer need the null, so let's select it and delete it by pressing backspace or delete. And now, let's create a small offset between the white data lines and the gray ones. Let's select all the data line 2 compositions at once. For this, click here, and choose Select Label Group. We can zoom in on the timeline. And now let's move the selected precomps for frames forward in time. Let's see how it looks. Awesome. And now, let's create another version of the data line animation. That is, we need to create the same animation but with a couple of changes in the design. Question: where should we copy the composition from so that we can make changes without messing up the previous ones? To do this, we'll duplicate the data line 2 precomps through the project panel. So let's select it and press Ctrl-D. Now let's enter the new composition and make some design changes. We'll begin by changing the color of the sphere to a darker color. Next, let's change the color of the stroke line to a darker color as well. Now let's bring this precomp into the main composition and position it in the scene. Let's place it in a way that when the sphere reaches its final position, will be in the center of the scene. Next, let's tag this layer with a different color to separate it from the other compositions. Now, let's isolate this layer to see only it. And now, let's reach the point where the sphere reaches its last position, and move this precomp accordingly. Once done, press R to display the rotation of this layer. Now, I want this composition to be positioned diagonally in the scene. However, if I rotate this composition, it will rotate from its center because the anchor point is in the middle. That means we need to move the anchor point here. So let's grab the anchor point tool and move it here. Once done, don't forget to switch back to the selection tool. And now, when we rotate the layer, it will rotate correctly. Let's move to the point in time where we can see all the layers, to see what we are doing. And now, let's set it to 45. Now press S to display the scale of this layer, and scale it down a bit. As you can see, the layer getting smaller, relative to its anchor point position. Let's set it to 50. And now let's create additional copies of the precomp, and arrange it across the scene. So let's select this precomp and duplicate it. Next, let's rotate it. I think we can set it to 135. Now let's duplicate this one more time, and rotate it as well. 224 degrees looks fine. Now these two precomp are symmetrically placed. And now, let's duplicate this precomp one last time, and rotate it relative to the precomp in front of it. 310 looks good. Now, let's check that everything looks fine. Okay, now let's close all these layers, unisolate them, and move on. As you can see, we've got a ton of precomps in our layer panel, making it hard to navigate. To save some time and make things easier, we should organize our layers. So first, let's enlarge this panel and select only the data line 2 precomps. Now move them up so they stand side by side. Next, let's create a slight offset for the data line 3 compositions. To do this, let's stand at a point in time where we can see all the precomps. And now, select all of them and move them a few frames forward. Let's see how it looks. I think it looks great. Alright, we have completed designing the data line scene. It's a great time to press Ctrl S to save everything we have done so far. And now, to keep our main composition organized, we will select all the precomps and nest them into a single composition. You can do this by pressing Ctrl-Shift-C. Now, rename the composition to Data Lines Main and click OK. And now, to maintain the highest quality if we want to scale this composition later, let's activate the collapse function for this precomp and all the precomps within it. Click here if you don't see the collapse function. Awesome! And now, it's an excellent time to press Ctrl S to save the project before we move on to the next part, where we will animate the main sphere and create a super cool portal animation. It's going to be awesome, so see you in the next one. Welcome back! In this part, we will animate the colorful sphere, create cool ripple animation behind it, and learn how to make a portal. Let's start with the colorful sphere animation. To do this, let's find it in the layers of the logo design, and drag it into our composition. Now, let's go to the beginning of the animation. Turn off this precomp. Press S, and create a scale animation for the sphere. Let's change the value to 0 at this point in time, and create the first keyframe with this value. Then, let's move to the second number 1, and change the value to 100. Now let's convert these keyframes to easy ease. So, select these keyframes, press F9, and adjust the velocity through the graph editor, so the layer starts growing quickly, and slows down towards the end. Let's see how it looks. Great, and now let's add a rotation animation. So let's select the layer. Now press R to see the rotation property. And let's learn how we can rotate the sphere without creating keyframes. We can do this with a simple expression. So first, to create a new expression for this property, hold the Alt key and click once on the stopwatch. Now let's write time multiples 100 and click here to finish the action. And there it is. Our sphere will rotate without keyframes. Now I'll teach you a cool trick to create a cool highlight effect on the sphere, to give it a more 3D look. First, right-click on the layer, go to Layer Styles, and select Inner Shadow. If you zoom in a bit, you'll see we now have a shadow in this part. Let's open the effect, change the color to white, and then set the blend mode to screen. As you can see, we are already getting a nice highlight around this area. Now, let's set the opacity to 100%, distance to 8, and size to 15. Once done, let's change the position of the highlight we created. To do this, we need to rotate the angle parameter. Let's set it to 340. And finally, to keep these layers in the best quality, activate the collapse function for this layer, and close it. OK. And now let's go back to the beginning of the animation, and create the ripple that should be behind the sphere. To do this, select the ellipse tool. Now, click once here, to ensure we're not selecting any layer. Now, turn off the fill color. Then, change the stroke color to white, and create a circle while holding the Shift key. Now, let's center this layer in the scene using Ctrl Home. And instead of creating a scale animation for this layer, we can simply select the sphere layer. Press S, select the property, and hit Ctrl-C to copy the keyframes on it. Now, select the circle, and press Ctrl-V to paste the keyframes. Press U to see the keyframes, and let's animate the stroke thickness of this circle as well. So, let's open and close the layer to see all the parameters. We can close Transform, and now open Contents, Ellipse, Stroke. And now, let's change the width to 40, and create the first keyframe at this point in time. Now move to second one, and change the width to 0. Once done, convert these keyframes to Easy Ease and see how it looks. Awesome! Now let's move the ripple layer a bit forward in time to create a gentle offset between the sphere animation. It looks great. We can turn on this pre-comp for now. So, after we finish animating the sphere and the ripple, let's put these two layers into one pre-comp to maintain order in our main composition. Let's change the name to Big Sphere Comp, and press OK. Now let's enter this pre-comp and resize it. Because right now we have a lot of empty and unnecessary space here. So, press Ctrl-K to access the composition settings, and resize it to 600 by 600. This is much better. Now select this layer, press U to reveal its keyframes, and cut the layer to the point where the animation ends. Stand here with the time indicator, and press Alt and right bracket to do that. Let's see how it looks before moving on. Great! Now let's go back to the main composition and activate Collapse for this pre-comp. Now, go back to the Selection tool and tag this pre-comp with a different color, so we can distinguish it from the Data Lines comp. And now, let's move this layer forward in time and find the point where the big sphere is supposed to enter the scene. It should happen here, when all the data spheres join in the center. Let's position it here and see how it looks. It looks good, but now I notice that the ripple is above the big sphere. I'll zoom in a bit to show you what I mean. We don't want the ripple to be in front, we need it to be behind the sphere. So, let's enter this pre-comp and move this layer below the sphere layer. Okay, let's go back to the main composition, set the preview screen to fit, and move on to the next part, where we'll learn how to create the portal and the text animation scene. Let's start with the portal. First, let's turn off the layers and open a grid for a better workflow. You can activate this grid from here, or open it with the shortcut Alt and apostrophe key. Great, now let's select the pen tool. Then, click here to make sure we're not selecting any layer. Now turn on the fill and leave it temporarily in gray. Leave the stroke in white with a thickness of 10. We can change it later if needed. And now, let's start creating the portal. Create the first point here and continue shaping it. Next, double-click on the path of the shape, and while holding the Shift and Control keys, resize it symmetrically from all directions. This should be enough. Then press Enter to finish the action. And now, let's animate it. But before that, press Alt and apostrophe key to turn off the grid. Now, open the layer and the shape properties. To animate this layer, we need to create keyframes for the path of this shape. So for now, let's go to the second number one, because we know the shape of the portal should look exactly as it does now. Therefore, we can create the first keyframe and tell After Effects that at this time point, the shape should look like this. Now, let's go back in time and adjust the shape to how it should look at the beginning. So first, let's select this point, press the apostrophe key to see the center of the scene. Now let's move this point to the center. Then, let's select this point, and move it to the center as well. We can adjust it a bit with the arrow keys. Next, let's select the keyframes and press F9 to convert them to Easy Ease. Finally, hold the Alt key and click on one of the keyframes to change the velocity through the keyframe velocity panel. Set it to 85 for both values, hit OK, and see how it looks. Great! Now let's create a reveal animation for this path. To create this reveal animation, we can create a mask for this shape and then animate the path of the mask to reveal the shape. Let's see what I mean. First, select the layer. Then, click and hold the ellipse tool to select the rectangle tool. Now, make sure we have this layer selected and create the mask. But pay attention to what happened. Instead of creating a mask, we just created a new shape. Let's press Ctrl Z to undo the action and try to understand why it happened. To create masks on shape layers, we need to select this icon here. This way, After Effects will know that we want to create a new mask on this shape layer and not create an additional shape inside of this layer. Okay, after selecting the icon, let's create the mask. Now, what we need to do is animate the mask's path. But before that, let's move the keyframes for the portal opening forward in time, because before the opening, we need to create the keyframes for the reveal animation of the stroke. So, move these keyframes to the second number 1. Now, let's create an animation for the mask's path. To see the path of the mask, select the layer and press M. Now, at this point in time, which is the second number 1, the mask should look like it does now. So, let's create the first keyframe when the path looks as it does currently. Now, go back in time to the beginning of this layer, and let's change the path of the mask until we don't see the white stroke of the portal. To do this, let's switch back to the selection tool. Now, select the 2 bottom points of the mask, and move them to the center of the layer. Now, select the points of the upper part of the mask and move them to the center of the layer as well. Be careful not to select the path point of the portal. Select only the mask's path. Now, let's get closer and move the points using the arrow keys on the keyboard, until we won't see the layer. Then, select the keyframes and press F9. This time, we'll change their velocity using the graph editor to make the mask open quickly at the beginning of the animation. Okay, now as you can see, when the shape opens, we have a minor issue with the corners. If I move back and forth, you can see the corners getting sharp. To fix this, let's close the layer and reopen it. Close the mask, and now, let's access the stroke of this shape. Here, change the line join to round join. Once done, close the stroke, and let's move on. Now let's create a nice animation for the stroke width. First, let's find a point in time where we want to start the stroke with animation. Let's go to the second number 1, after the revealing animation. Now open the stroke, and let's animate this property. You can enlarge this area a bit to see it better. And now, I want the thickness to be 10, before the portal opens up. And at the second number 2, when the portal opens, the thickness should be 0. Now, let's ease these keyframes, and see how it looks. I think it looks awesome. We can close the parameters of this layer. And now, let's time this layer with the rest of the animation. So first, we can select this layer, and press U to see the keyframes. And before timing the portal animation with the rest of the scene, press Enter on this layer and change the name to Rhombus, because that's the official name for this shape. You can also write portal if you want. It doesn't really matter. Now let's close the layer, set the preview screen to fit, and move on to time this layer with the rest of the animation. I think the portal should enter the scene somewhere around here. So let's turn on the rest of the layers, and drag the portal to the location of the time indicator. That doesn't matter for now. Because before the portal opens, we need to make the sphere touch the portal line. So, let's move it here for now, and create a touch animation for the sphere. That's supposed to start the animation of the portal. For now, let's decide that the touch animation should start from the second number 4. We can also move this layer forward in time for now, so it doesn't interfere with us. Now, select the big sphere and press P to see the position property. And now, let's create the first keyframe with the current value, because we're happy with the position of this layer up to this point. Now, let's move 15 frames forward and move this layer here. And now, let's move 15 frames forward again, and move this layer here. Because this is where the line of the portal will start to reveal. Now, let's move to second number 6, and move the layer here. We'll understand why in a moment. Next, let's find a point in time when the portal should start to open. And it should happen when the sphere does the touch animation. So let's move back and forward in time, while trying to find the perfect time for the portal to open up. I think we should start the portal from the second number 4. Let's drag it here, and see how it looks. This looks like good timing in relation to the animation of the sphere. And now, let's improve the animation of the sphere. Let's select all the keyframes and press F9. Now, let's make the sphere reach this point quickly, to create an illusion of the sphere touching the line. To do this, let's select this keyframe and go to the graph editor. And now, let's drag this handle here, and this handle here, so that the sphere will move quickly in this part. Now, let's select this keyframe, and move its handle like this. Let's see what we've got. That's a bit too fast. Okay, that's better. The touch motion still doesn't feel realistic enough to me. Let's tighten it a bit more. Now, let's move the handle of this keyframe here so that the ball quickly bounces back after touching the line. Let's see how it looks. Looks great. Now, let's go back to our timeline and continue timing between these layers. Right now, the line of the portal starts its animation too early, and it collides with the sphere. So let's move the portal forward in time. And now, let's adjust the opening animation of the portal, because right now it's not synchronized with the touch animation of the sphere, which happens at the second number 5. Press U on the portal layer, and select the keyframes for the shape's opening and the thickness of the line, and move them here. Let's see how it looks. Alright, looks good. Except the ball moves too much to the side after the portal opens. So let's stand on this keyframe and adjust it. Let's move it here. That's better. Press Ctrl S to save everything we have done so far. Now, let's step back in the timeline, close the layers, and move on to the next part, where we will create the text animation. That is going to get out from inside the portal. So see you in the next part, it's going to be awesome. But before you dive into the next lesson, I highly recommend that you take a 10-minute break. Get up from your chair, do some light stretching, and drink a glass of water. This will help you to recharge your brain for the next lesson. Welcome back. Let's get started with the lesson on how to create a cool text animation that comes out of the portal. And to make our work easier, we can create our text in a separate composition. That way, we won't have to worry about the other layers messing up our work. Plus, it'll be a lot simpler to add the text animation to our scene later on. So, let's create a new composition. We can do this through Composition, New Composition, or use the shortcut Ctrl-N. Let's call it Text Comp. Set the dimensions to Full HD for now. We might adjust it later. We'll keep the other settings as they are, and hit OK. And there you go, we've just jumped to the new composition we created. You can also find it in the project panel. Great, and now, let's drag the original Illustrator text layer into our comp, to use it as a reference. Then, select the text tool, and write the company name. Now, double-click on the text and change the font to Ezra Irregular. Then, color the text in white and change the size to 100. Now let's select just the letter O and sample the color from the original layer. Once done, we can delete this layer. And don't forget to go to Paragraph to ensure our text is centered and written from left to right. Alright, now select the text layer, press Ctrl-Alt-Home to center the anchor point to the center of the layer. And then Ctrl-Home to center the layer in the composition. Now, switch back to the Selection tool and let's animate the text. Instead of manually splitting and animating each letter one by one, which would take a lot of time, we'll use the layer animators in After Effects. To do this, select the text through the layer and create the first animator, which should be of type Position, because this is the animation we want to create. Now let's get closer. You'll see small red crosses here. These are actually the anchor points of each letter, currently located at the bottom of the letter. Let's learn how to move it to the center of the letters. For this, open More Options and change the value from in grouping alignment. In our case, -30 is excellent. Now let's close it and move on. Now let's decide where the point of change in this text will be. In our case, it's where it enters the frame. Let's decide that the text should come in from the left. We'll write -600 here. Now, let's open the Range selector and Advanced. And now, let's change the animator's shape to ramp down. Why ramp down and not ramp up? Because we want the last letter to move first. Okay, so let's go to the beginning of the animation and create a keyframe for the offset property with a value of 100. Now let's move to the second number 3 and change the value to -100. And now, let's improve this animation by changing the velocity of these keyframes. When using animators, we don't need to access the keyframe velocity panel. We can control it directly from the animator. Let's set it to 80 for ease high and 80 for ease low. Let's see how it looks. Looks good. Now let's add a rotation animation for the letters. To do this, let's select the animator, click the small arrow next to the word Add, go to Property, and choose Rotation. Now we have a new property in the animator. And we can set that at the starting point of the animator. The letters will be rotated by -90 degrees. Now, the keyframes we created for the offset will be affected by both properties in this animator, the position and the rotation. It looks great. Now, let's go back to our main composition and insert the text animation we just created into it. Let's move this layer forward in time, and time the text entrance in relation to what's happening in the scene. So, the text should start at this time, from the second number 6, where the portal is open. But as you can see, it's not positioned where it should be. The text should be positioned somewhere around here. That means we need to go back to the text comp and adjust its final position. Let's learn what we should do in situations like this. So, first thing first, we can lock the panel of the main composition here. Now, let's go inside the precomp of the text. And now, drag this precomps panel here. On this side, we see the precomp of the text from the inside, and here we see our main composition, which is locked right now. That means that all the layers we see in this panel belong to the text composition. Alright, and now, when we move the text, we immediately see how it looks in the main composition. Okay, so let's find a good position for the text. Somewhere around here. Now, because we moved the text, if we go to the beginning of the animation, it seems like part of it is in the wrong place. Because right now we can see it, before it goes out from the portal. That means that we need to adjust the changing point we set for the position property of our text animator. That's not a problem, we just need to change the starting point of the text in our animator. So let's go to the position property of the animator and change it to -700. As you can see, now everything is in the right place. Once done, we can unlock this panel and close one of them. Okay, so we're back to the text composition. After we've positioned and adjusted it, let's press Ctrl-K to resize it. We have a lot of empty space here, so let's scale down the height until we find the right size. I think we can set it to 250. Finally, let's go back to the main composition and apply collapse for this pre-comp. Now, we need to create a reveal effect where the text emerges from our portal. That means, we need to create the illusion that the text is going out from the portal. And we can do it using the track matte function. That is, we can use the portal shape to act as a mask for the text pre-comp. I'll show you what I mean. First, let's duplicate this shape, move it above the text, change the name of this layer to mask for text, and now make the text visible only within the boundaries of this shape. We can do this using the track matte function. Let's click here to see this function. Now let's drag the pick whip of the track matte of this layer to the portal layer. Now, let's select it and press M to delete the mask on this layer. We don't need it right now. And now, as you can see, on the side of the portal, we can't see the letters. And that's exactly what we need to create the illusion of the text going out of the portal. But at the same time, we also can't see the letters that are supposed to come out of it. To fix this, we need to change the path of this shape. And before doing that, let's temporarily turn off the layer of the real portal so we can see what we're doing. As you may already know, there are keyframes on the path that change its shape. The first keyframes don't bother us. What bothers us is how the portal opens. That is, the second keyframe. That means, we need to focus on the last keyframes of the path and change it. So let's stand on the keyframe we want to adjust. And now, to see the points of the path of this shape, we need to select the path through the layer. Now we can select this point, and move it to the right, to change this path animation. Now the text will be visible because we've expanded the area of the layer that functions as a mask. Okay, let's turn the real portal back on and see how it all looks together. It looks great. Now, let's create a closing animation for the portal. First, let's find a point in time when it should happen. Let's say around here. Now, select this layer and press U to see the keyframes on it. Next, let's create the same animation as in the beginning, but in reverse. We can select all of these keyframes, copy them, and paste them at the time indicator position using Ctrl V. Now right-click on one of the keyframes, go to Keyframe Assistant, and choose Time Reverse Keyframes. Once done, select the keyframes for closing the portal and move them here, because they need to start closing before the mask closes. Let's see how it looks. Great, so after the text is out, and the portal is closed, let's bring the sphere closer to the text. That means we need to create a position animation for it. So first, select the sphere comp, and press P to see the position parameter. And now, let's find a point in time when we want the sphere to start moving towards the center of the composition, say at second 9, just a moment before the portal line closes. Now, let's create keyframes with the current value. Until this point, we want the sphere to stay where it is right now. Now, move to second 10, and move the sphere to its final position. Somewhere around here. Now, let's go back to the point where the sphere starts moving, and also adjust the text's position to move towards the center from this point in time. So, select the text comp, press P, create keyframe with the current value, move to second 10, and move this layer here. Now, select all the keyframes we've created for the position, press F9, hold the Alt key, and click twice on one of the keyframes to change their velocity through the keyframe velocity panel. Set it to 85 on both. Okay, let's see how it looks. I can see that the white line hasn't finished its animation yet. So, let's move these keyframes a bit forward in time. This way, the sphere and text will start moving when the line has completely disappeared. Let's see it once again. I think it's great. And now, let's create an outro animation for this logo. This time, let's make them disappear using the opacity property. But first, we need to find a point in time when we want it to happen. Let's decide that it's going to happen from the second number 12. Let's select both layers and press T to open the opacity. Now, create keyframes with the current value, which is 100%. Then, move to second 13 and change the opacity to 0. Next, select all the keyframes and press F9. Let's see how it looks. You'll notice that the sphere doesn't disappear like the text. This is because within this pre-comp, there is a layer style. Remember the inner shadow? That's why. To solve this problem, click here and turn off the collapse function on this pre-comp. And now the opacity animation works correctly. But in case we want to keep the pre-comp at the highest quality and still enable collapse, we need to go into this pre-comp, select the layer with the layer style, and press U twice to quickly find the layer style. Now let's select the layer style and press Ctrl X to cut it from here. Then, let's go back to the main composition, select the pre-comp of the sphere, and hit Ctrl V to paste the layer style onto it. This way, we preserve the highlight we created, and we can still enable collapse for this layer. Great, and now, it's a good time to press Ctrl S and save the project before moving on to the next stage, where we'll color our objects in the scene, and make it look really awesome. It's going to be a fun one, so see you in the next part. Welcome back. So, let's start to stylize and give colors to the objects in the scene. The first thing we're going to paint is the portal. So, let's select this layer, click on the word fill, and choose to fill this layer with a gradient. Then click OK. Now, let's learn how to control the gradient we created. To find it quickly, select this layer, type the word gradient in the search bar, and press Enter. Now, let's open this parameter and click on Edit Gradient. And now, let's paint it with the right colors. Let's click on this color and change it to blue. As you can see, we can't see the color because its opacity is set to 0. To change it, click here and set it to 100, and now we can see the blue color. Now, we can go back to this color and choose a different color. Let's choose a darker blue. Now, let's click on the second color and paint it with a lighter blue. Next, let's check its opacity. It's currently at 50%. So change it to 100 and click OK. Once done, let's change the position of the colors. To do it, we can drag these handles to the sides. If you can't see these handles, you can adjust the color position from here. You can also place it up and down if you want. Okay, I'll leave it like this. If you want to change the colors later, you can simply click here and access the gradient editor as before. Now, let's move on to the beginning of the animation and change the colors in the data lines pre-comps. So let's enter the data lines pre-comp and start by changing the colors for data line 1. So first, let's select the stroke layer and then click here on stroke to fill it with a gradient color. Once we've chosen the gradient color, After Effects will display the last settings we used for the gradient. That's not a problem. Type gradient in the search bar and press enter. Now, open the gradient and change the colors. Let's drag the layer of the big sphere into this comp, so we can see the colors in it. And now, let's enter Edit Gradient and change the colors. But before that, let's make sure the opacity for all colors is set to 100%. Okay, now let's go back to the colors and change them using the eyedropper. Alright, now let's click here to set the second color for the gradient. We can sample this color and darken it a bit. Now, let's move the time indicator to see how the stroke looks along the animation. I see that the distance between the color points is too close. So, let's move the endpoint here and see how it looks. Alright, and now let's adjust the start point, either by changing the value from here or moving the point manually while holding the Shift key. I think the line should be brighter at the start and darker at the end. To do this, enter the gradient and reverse the colors. We can brighten this color a bit. Let's see how it looks. I think we need to darken the darker color a bit more. Now, let's select the second color and copy the color's info, because we will use it to fill the small sphere now. So, select this layer, go to the fill, and press Ctrl V. And now, I want to talk about an important topic. Let's say we decide to scale down this sphere. So I'll press S to open the scale property, and as you can see, we already have keyframes here. This means that if we scale down the sphere, we will create new keyframes and mess up the animation. To scale it down without messing up the animation, we can scale it down using the transform properties of this shape. I'll explain what I mean. Let's open this layer, close its transform properties, and open the contents and the ellipse. As you can see, for shape layers, there are additional transform properties that belong to the shape itself. These are the transform properties of the layer, and here we already have keyframes. And these are the transform properties of the shape. There are no keyframes here. So, we can shrink this sphere using the scale property that belongs to the transform properties of the shape. Let's set it to 80. You should remember this, especially when working with shaped layers. Alright, let's close the layer and delete the big sphere from here. And now, let's go back to the composition of all the data lines and check that all the precomps named data line 1 have been updated. Excellent, now let's change the colors for the next compositions. Let's enter data line 2. First, we'll resize the sphere through the transform properties of the shape, not from the transform properties of the layer. So let's open the content and the ellipse. Now let's open the transform properties of this shape and change the scale from here. Let's set it to 70. And this time, we will leave the color of the sphere and the stroke in white. Now, go back to the composition of all the data lines. And let's focus on data line 3. Let's put the big sphere here to sample its colors. And now, let's color the stroke layer here with some nice bright color from the sphere. Next, let's copy the data for this color and paste it as the fill color for the small sphere. You can delete this layer now. Great, let's go back to the composition of all the data lines and see how it looks. Now let's improve the look of the precomps, named data line 2, with an effect called glow. Let's drag the effect onto this composition. We can turn it on and off to see to which composition we applied the effect. It's this one down here. Let's go to the point in time when we see this layer fully. Now, let's set the glow radius to 60. Once done, let's copy the effect from here using Ctrl-C. Select the other precomps named data line 2 and press Ctrl-V to paste the effect. It looks great. Once done, let's go back to our main composition and paste the effect on the ripple as well. I'm referring to the ripple layer that pops out behind the big sphere. So, let's go into this composition, select this layer, and press Ctrl-V. Now, let's return to the main composition and see how it all looks together. I think it's perfect. Now we're ready to move on to the next stage, which is creating the background. For this, let's go back to the project panel and drag the background layer into our scene. As you can see, this layer is the same size as the original Illustrator design. Let's learn how to create such a background directly in After Effects. First, let's create a new solid using the shortcut Ctrl-Y. Now, change its name to BG. Make sure the solid matches the size of our composition, leave the color black, and hit OK. Now move the solid below all the other layers and apply an effect, called Gradient Ramp, to it. Solid layers don't have a built-in gradient, so we need to add the effect. OK, now let's change the colors of the effect. As you can see, the shape of the gradient in the original design is circular. Let's make our layer's gradient circular as well. You can delete this layer from here. Now change the ramp shape to radial. And now we have a circular type gradient. Now, let's move the position of the white color slightly up and the position of the black color slightly down. Now, let's set the preview screen back to fit and turn off the grid. And with this, we have finished creating the animation, and we are ready to render this piece. But before rendering, let's set the work area to the point in time where we want to render this composition. We can see that the animation ends at 13 seconds. So let's press N to shorten the work area to that time point. And now, let's watch the animation one more time before rendering. Okay, I think the color of these data lines blends too much with the background. So let's change this color a bit. To do that, let's go to the composition of all the data lines, and enter data line 3 from here, or from here, because this composition is already open. And now, let's change the color of the stroke and the sphere. Let's change it to this color. Now, copy the data for this color and paste it as the stroke color. Great, I think it looks much better. Now, let's press Ctrl S to save the project before rendering it. OK, and now let's press Ctrl M to access the render panel. For the output mode, we'll choose H.264, 40 Mbps. Now, let's select where to render the animation. We'll render it to our renders folder. Make sure the name is right. Now, click Save and Render, and wait for a moment. Once the rendering is done, we can open the output mode and click on the link to go to the folder where we saved our animation. Let's open the video and see how it turned out. As you can see, we have a small issue here. Our gradient doesn't look so good. You can see the color bands. Let's go back to our project and try to fix it as much as we can. Let's go to the main composition, select the background layer, and here, in the gradient effect, change the ramp scatter to 100. This should soften the color bands in the gradient. We can zoom in a bit to see it up close. Okay, now let's press Ctrl M again, and render it one more time. You can close the previous render. Select H.264, 40 Mbps again. Now, select this render for rendering in its place. Click Save, and then Replace. Now, hit the Render button, click OK, and wait for a moment. Now, let's go back to the folder, and check the new render. As you can see, it's better now. Awesome, now let's go back to our project and organize it before closing it. And to organize the project, we need to create folders in the project panel, as we did in the previous lessons. So first, you can close this panel. Now let's go to the project panel. You can close all the open compositions. And now, let's create a folder called Assets. Drag the folder with the logo layers and the solids folder into it. You can tag the main composition with a different color than the rest of the compositions. Now, let's create a new folder called Precomps. Drag all the precomps we created during the project into this folder, except for the main composition. Now, since we worked on a relatively complex project, let's clean up the software. Go to Edit, select Purge, and choose All Memory and Disk Cache. Here you can see how much junk has been collected. It may be a different number for you. In any case, let's click OK, and wait for a few seconds. Now you can press Ctrl S to save the project. You can also exit Illustrator. And finally, close After Effects. I hope you enjoyed this lesson, and I can't wait to see you in the next one. where we create an epic logo animation for a made-up strategic game company and explore the 3D world in After Effects. It's going to be awesome, so see you there. But before you dive into the next lesson, I highly recommend that you take a 10-minute break. Get up from your chair, do some light stretching, and drink a glass of water. This will help you to recharge your brain for the next lesson. Hi there! I hope you found the lessons helpful and learned some new and interesting things. To better remember everything we covered, I highly recommend practicing by completing this homework assignment. Your task is to recreate this cool animation. You have the freedom to change the colors and add any additional graphics you like. And whenever you face any issues or have some questions, feel free to check the AE project file to see the steps I took. Additionally, you can always reach out to me for help. Good luck!